don't believe that there's a headphone port on the display.
There you go. It's recording now. All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the 8th meeting of the Global Internet Hub Strategic Planning Committee. Thank you so much for your engagement over the last several months. This was a big lift for all of us to commit this much time, and I really want to thank everyone for doing that. And here we are now down to our last in-person meeting, and we'll go over the meeting goals in a minute. I think in the interest of time, even though we have a lot of time, we're not going to go around and do introductions. We've all been together and I think met most of one another, and we certainly have seen the list of who's involved. There are 62 people, which is amazing, and I think representing about 10 different kind of categories of people, which is fantastic, from the military to economic development to businesses to digital infrastructure folks. So really, and as I've come to learn from our consultants, this is sort of a unique thing that's happening here. And it's really, I think, perfect setting for us to have our final meeting here at CarMax, the Innovation Center. It's kind of like being in Silicon Valley for the morning. And so I want to start the meeting with Shamim and to thank you and also your colleague, David, who's been on our committee. Shamim actually just joined the board of RVA 757 Connect. So we're thrilled to have him as a new trustee. And to take out some valuable time today and to sit with us for these 3 hours and to really weigh in on this. This is an honor to have you here. So would love for you to share just a few words about the Innovation Center. We did our research and found out that you actually used to be the Putney Shoe Factory a long time ago, but now you're doing bigger things than shoes.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CarMax. Really excited to see all of you, and those of you who are joining us virtually, welcome. So my name is Shamim Mohammed. I've been with CarMax for a little over 10 years. I'm the Chief Information and Technology Officer. I report directly to the CEO, part of the senior executive team here at CarMax. So this Digital Innovation Center, we opened a little over a year ago. And our goal was to really bring and create like a Silicon Valley type of environment in Richmond. If you know, and hopefully David will give you a little tour of this place. You'll see that we really took all the concept of our Richmond neighborhoods and replicated here. So all the meeting rooms and conference rooms and even this room that we're in was James River. So we really tried to bring the Richmond community feel into our office space. And our goal was really to create an open environment for our associates to work in. So this building primarily hosts most of the technology and digital folks. We also have some marketing associates here working as well. And it's been great for us to attract and retain and develop the talent and create an environment like any other place in Silicon Valley. Now, I spend a lot of time in the Silicon Valley, being in technology field for over 30 years. What I can tell you is Richmond and this region that we're promoting and growing is unlike others. It's a perfect place for talent to cultivate and grow digital kind of environment. CarMax, if you think about CarMax, you know us as just a retail store. You see a lot of stores out there. But what most people don't realize, CarMax actually has become a digital company over the last 7-8 years. And the way we innovate, the way we work, the way we get things done and take care of customers is really like a digital technology company, like a Silicon Valley company. And Silicon Valley startup is how we work. And I'm very proud to say that CarMax has been recognized by many industry professionals and got a number of awards in terms of how we work. Because sometimes we have digital Silicon Valley companies coming to Richmond to learn how to work like a digital company. So that gives me a lot of pride. So I'm super excited to have all of you here today and very excited to be part of the RVA 757 Connects effort. This is, to me, is like best place to live in the world. And I've never lived in any other place longer than this area. So I'm very vested in here. My plan is to retire from this area. And I want this to become like a Silicon Valley. And therefore, we're doing really going to position us to be like a Silicon Valley kind of area. Global Internet Hub effort, I know a lot of you are working very hard on this. It's going to really open up the possibilities and give us the foundation we need to make this like it's Silicon Valley, next Silicon Valley. So excited about that. And again, have a good productive meeting. I'm looking forward to learning more, and welcome to CarMax. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Some of you guys have said you've got to leave an hour early, and that's fine. We're recording this, so we'll have that posted, and you can always call Greg and myself. And the last hour, we're going to get more into the recommendations. I think we're going to have a couple of folks join us in about an hour. One of them is Secretary Cummings, who's part of our 62 people, and the secretary is the Secretary of Finance. So we're delighted to have him in this final in-person meeting. And then Bob Holsworth, Dr. Holsworth is going to be joining us about 11 o'clock as well. Dr. Holsworth is a person with Decide Smart, and he is going to help write the plan. And he is an incredible writer, big thinker, and has done a lot with economic development and with Go Virginia, and personal friend of mine, so he's going to help out. And he's been really deeply involved the last month as we've tried to pull everything together in the document that we share. So with that, I'm going to go over today's agenda. And this is the opportunity for us to share as a group what we think of the emerging strategies and the rationale, our why we're doing this. And, you know, and what is a global internet hub? I think that's so important. One of the things Taylor Adams has said, you got to make this simple. You got to make it so people understand this. And he runs economic development for Virginia Beach. So I think getting into that, understanding the components of a global internet hub is really important, then our why, and then our how. And so we're going to hear from Telegeography, from John, and from Interglobix, from Vinay. You guys are going to give sort of the top line overview of what you found in all of your work. I think that's going to be really helpful. And then we'll get into the 10 strategic imperatives that we got to you guys, and have a real good conversation about them, because where we're going to go from here, the final steps are really important, and I want to make sure that everybody feels like they've had a chance to provide input, and then you're going to see a draft of the plan coming up. And so with that, I'm going to just share this process that we've been through, which I'm hearing from Vinay and John. This is sort of new territory to do something this big in scale. We're inspired by the Marseille people that put a plan together. I'm not sure they had 62 people involved in putting a plan together, but that's what we've been doing. And we've been getting highlights from the research that these two gentlemen have been doing. You're going to see just a little bit of new research on mining of jobs EQ data in a few minutes. But also there's some concurrent studies going on with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the Alliance. And Steve shared a little bit of that at our last meeting. We saw a little bit of that research. And then Nancy can share, there's a big kind of a workforce study going on, and that's involving some of the universities that we'll just talk about in a few minutes. So a lot of inputs coming into this plan, and our real next step is to create this draft plan. And every step of the way, we have been putting all of our meeting notes, all of our consultant preliminary plans on this website. And this website, as promised in the Go Virginia grant, will be a legacy piece that we're going to turn this into a website, probably have it be part of RVA 757 Connects, but a distinct website that'll be a resource for other people in Virginia that want to think this big and on this sort of scale. So we've got a lot of insights from the primary research. We've gathered a lot of secondary research. So we're going to memorialize it, if you will, and make it an inventory that other people can access. But I hope you guys have found this resource helpful through this process. Our schedule, I'm going to start here because this is where we're going to end in a couple of hours. This is our last in-person meeting. We, as RVA 757 Connects, we're a nonprofit, and we're run by an executive committee with a lot of really seasoned executives on that executive committee. Our next EC meeting is on March the 8th, and we're going to share the outcome of this meeting with our executive committee meeting. And then during the month of March, with Bob Holsworth's help and two small subcommittees, we want to draft this plan and get the document back out at the end of March to everybody, the 62 folks, to weigh in. But we think a smaller group needs to be the editing team. And you're going to see a lot of the work that we have in this document repurposed, and we're going to do it in two different components. We feel like there needs to be an executive summary, And we want to produce it as a map that you can really unfold that really shows all the components of a global internet hub and where we are today. And on the other side, really presents the background of this effort, who's on the committee, the goals that we had, and then our recommendations. And so we're envisioning this executive summary can be not only inserted in publications, but it can be handed out to all the General Assembly members, and they can fold it out and have the shock and awe of something big visual to go, wow, this is what everybody's been talking about. And then a traditional report that we need to turn into Go Virginia. And that'll be a narrative with visuals, but it really will be a lot of details. And so by the end of March, early April, we're going to share with the full steering committee this draft and the draft of the map. And then we need to really understand the stakeholders' interests, because it's going to take a whole team to make this happen. So we want to do a deliberate presentation to the economic development industry from the state level, the regional level, and the local economic development agencies at the county level. And then we have a board meeting on April 26, RVA 757 Connect. So this will be the topic of the board meeting. And I think we'll have all of the details worked out clearly by then. And then ultimately turn our plan into Go Virginia. And the last time we did a plan like this, that you guys had a copy of our opportunity study that identified 4 industries that we really think are going to be the job attractors in the future. The boards want to hear the plan brought to life, so we'll do presentations, in-person presentations to both Region 4 and Region 5 Go Virginia. And then when it's fully baked, we're going to focus it on the Innovation Spotlight, the series that Greg runs, and then start on this long-term journey. Because this plan is not something that we push a button and everything happens the first day, but it really is going to be a blueprint for us to follow over the next 5 years or so. So I mentioned that executive summary. That to us is going to be a real high impact piece. And then the report document is really going to explain, what is a global internet hub? Why do we want to be one? What's our running start? We already have a bunch of assets in place thanks to the hard work of a lot of people on this committee. And then our phasing and budget, and then roles and responsibilities. It's going to take everybody to make this happen, to go faster. And that's really what this plan envisions. How do we make this maturation of our digital ecosystem happen faster than it will on its own? So thank you guys for your commitment. And I want to thank you guys for your vision. This is unprecedented. We put together this vision statement that I hope captures what we're trying to do. This is an unprecedented public-private partnership in digital infrastructure industry coordination. You're going to hear a lot about that from Vinay today. That makes this corridor, this is Richmond and Hampton Roads, a global internet hub, which is the digital backbone and spark that transforms Richmond and Hampton Roads into one of the world's most equitable and dynamic economies. So that's a tall order, but that's the vision. That's the shining city on the hill. That's what we want to be. I want to just take you through some highlights of this. This is a public-private partnership, and thrilled that the administration is involved with us in other localities. The digital infrastructure industry coordination, I can't say this enough. It's something that we learned from Marseille, that's how they got going in a big way, and it's something that Vinay will really touch on with examples from around the world. The idea of making Virginia this global internet hub, when you see those names of the folks that are already global interconnection points or interconnection hubs around the planet, boy, if we could be on that list in partnership with Nova, that's the goal. To be transformative, I don't want to beat us up too much, but in my life, I get to do a lot of economic development work. Richmond and Hampton Roads both are not the top of the list. We are not leading in talent development, population gains, GDP, productivity per worker. We're at the tail end of the top 50 cities over 1 million. So we need something like this to really be a spark. And when we look at ourselves together, Richmond and Hampton Roads, boy, that's the story. When you think about those subsea cables and you think about the integration center and you think about everything else in between, we really have a more powerful story together. And the last point is really one of the overarching goals. We really want this to be equitable. We want the world to see a place where 100% of the residents have access to broadband, and as well as a place that really creates jobs and high-paying jobs from this industry for localities here, so, and for people here. So any comments on this? And this is how the meeting's going to be run from here out. We're going to share kind of our latest thinking that y'all have inspired, and then take any comments and go back and update this document. And then we'll use it as the outline to put together the report. Did y'all come to the right meeting? Does this sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
I have one question. You have Hampton Roads, and that can be interpreted as the city or the region. Should we add region into that?
It is the region. And it really is the way we think about it from RVA 757 Connects. Sometimes we'll use the term mega region. We really are a collaborative trying to help things go faster. But when we think about who's in our region, we think about the definition of the Planning District Commission. So the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission has 17 jurisdictions from Virginia Beach all the way to Williamsburg. And then our Planning District Commission here in Richmond called Plan RVA.
And I guess my
So-
point is, as we develop those documents.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And everybody, we're going to have a lot of content today and discussion. If there's something that you think about after the meeting, just reach out to us and said, hey, here's some comments, even a memo that says page 5, page 6, think about this. So this is a heavy lift for us, and today's a big day to get input, but it's not your last chance for input.
John?
Yeah.
Someone to follow up, you said it's the Richmond planning region, and then there was Hampton Roads that goes up to Williamsburg.
Right.
What about the spaces? Well, what's the space in between?
You know, I think for this effort, we're including the entire corridor. It's everybody from Henrico to Virginia Beach. And when we think about the future of the Richmond region, we put our arms around Petersburg because what's going on there with flow and life sciences. So we try to think about that whole swath. And we'll be clear in the report with a map that that's what this is.
And if I could add one thing, Go Virginia funded this, so it's regions 4 and 5. So we also have some geography with those two regions, just to keep that out of our minds. So, which are Richmond.
Okay. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this next section, but what has happened to me, I have not spent 10,000 hours on this topic, right? And when I started learning about bits and pieces of it, it was kind of in my mind, like trying to figure out the story here so we could share it at the very highest levels, that we could explain it to people that aren't in the IT business and attach it to economic development. And so the maturation period, and I'll speak for Greg and myself. Greg is a former reporter for 30 years at the Richmond Times-Dispatch and he was the editor of the business section. We just got a lot of help from people like Scott and others that are the technologists in the room and on the phone, and really started to say, how can we explain this to people? So we put together a series of slides, and as I've been briefing people on our work, I'm seeing their lights in their eyes open up. They're like, I get it now. Because when you say global internet hub, you could interpret that in somewhat like trite, or is that just some kind of packaging? That people really don't understand just how sophisticated the infrastructure is. And so this section is to help now Bob Holsworth and us to really write the plan, but be able to describe up front, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? So you saw in your document these slides here. And again, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through in heavy detail about these, but the idea is let's look at a hypothetical region that's an interconnection hub in general, but a global interconnection hub specifically. And I want to be really clear on this. The guys from Telegeography that are the international data collection experts, they have said, what we're trying to build here is an interconnection hub. And on a global scale, the ones that really have subsea cables, we would call them global interconnection hubs. The term global internet hub is a term you guys have used just in one of your charts to say here are the 10 or so. You know, you don't really have to be on that list to be an interconnection hub, right? And so we are, because of the subsea cables, a global internet hub today. We're just not at the scale of those 10 that are on a list that you happen to call a global internet hub list. But the technical term is global interconnection hub. You want to add to that, John?
Yeah, I would just say, in our methodology, when we're measuring internet hubs, we're talking about a very specific measure of pop-to-pop aggregate internet connectivity that's cross-border. So it's very specific. And it's just one among many measures that kind of that give us an idea of the health of a local interconnection market. So when we talk about an interconnection market in the simplest terms, we're just talking about a place where networks go to meet locally. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From a marketing standpoint, we do have, which I can't believe was available, globalinternethub.com.net.info. .org. So we've got the URLs locked up, and the language from just a marketing standpoint, people tend to look at and get a little excited about. So, and I apologize for all the real technical experts in the room, but I think for lay people, you'll see that just visualizing an interconnection hub, starting off with the collection of these networks, and then those networks that overlap and connect interdependent hubs, and the fact that there are over a dozen really large US cities that are interconnection hubs. So starting with that, and then looking at the world spoke and system, and to see that there are this interconnection hubs on a global scale starts to put it into perspective, what we have here. And the components of it, and why this is so important, is that we think our strategy should align with how do we influence each of these component parts. And so we're hoping the artist that does the map will do a lot better job than John Martin trying to pull different images together that can really make it look a little more technical, but that robust local network that's in every market, and then having data centers, critical here. And Northern Virginia has 151 data centers. Our mega region has 14, and that's from Virginia Economic Development Partnerships database. And then visualizing the interconnection between cities, that there are diverse fiber routes connecting other hubs and markets. And then in some markets, municipal rings have been put in place and broadband authorities stood up. This is something that has happened in Hampton Roads, but this is a case-by-case situation. Not every market has a network ring, and it really is based on the need. Does the municipal governments, does the region need to have a network ring, or can some of the networks get repurposed or reprioritized? Is the network robust enough? Are there multiple carriers there? And what happened in Hampton Roads is they said, we really feel like we would benefit from a ring. All the information technology officers from the counties met for about a year. Nancy, help me, but met for about a year. They came to the conclusion that those 17 jurisdictions needed a ring to also help serve that last mile, but they priced it out, and then they got the city managers involved, and they made their recommendations. And the city manager said, we like this idea. We should do this predominantly because they were going to save half of their monthly internet fees as municipalities. And so they said, we really like those kind of savings. It's going to work for us. So they put together an authority and did an RFP and created a public-private partnership with GTS. And GTS is now has the contract to build the ring out. They're going to do it in 3 phases. The 5 cities on the south side, like Norfolk and Virginia Beach, and getting going at first, they all put in $5 million. So $25 million is funding that side of Hampton Roads, and then the peninsula, and then the surrounding counties. And so what GTS has as an incentive is that they get to lease some of those strands in the fiber network ring, but they also are incentivized to create that last mile for other IPSs that can come into this market and said, I can't build a ring, but I could handle the last mile into an underserved neighborhood. And so the more that this market gets filled in with 100% broadband coverage, the more money GTS stands to make and more fibers it can take in that ring. But the ring has some like 260 some, close to that, 260 some fibers. Each city gets 6. GTS gets some, and the rest of it will just get built out over time. But now this is all a fait accompli, and it's happening here. When we talk in a few minutes about the Richmond market or the market in between, I just want you to know it's not always a fait accompli that every market should have one. So you look across the country and you see rings in different places. And then reliable power, and we have Dominion's expert on data center power in the room, Stan. And so this is just one thing that we know from all of our research. This is a critical part of an interconnection hub, having that sustained reliable power. And then IXPs, and these are exchanges, and where they come into a physical location, it's an internet exchange point, an IXP, and these are really, really critical. It's the traffic exchanged here is on peering platforms, and this is something that we really have been educated on. Richmond has an IX in terms of DKIX. Hampton Roads doesn't, but the discussion there maybe is there might be one in the near future. But this is a very, very important part of the overall network. It really connects the network in a hyper way, if you will. And then the cloud infrastructure. And once you get to a certain point, those large content providers like Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they really want you to connect to their cloud services. And so the more mature a market is, the more they feel like the need to really have that local access through on-ramps. And so this is a whole nother part of envisioning what a really mature, robust digital infrastructure is. And then for those lucky folks that are near the coastline, some are global internet connection hubs because they have subsea cables. And right now we've got Virginia Beach has 2 landing sites and 3 cables that are alive right now. So pulling it all together, and this is what we're hoping the map kind of has as its backbone. What is that whole idea of an interconnection hub and the importance of all of these forces being integrated and moving in lockstep towards moving us up sort of the food chain globally in terms of how people see us. So I'm going to stop there. This is the map of the leading global interconnection hubs according to telegeography. But what do you guys think about this? When you saw it for the first time in the document, ways to improve this? Do you feel like we captured all the major elements? I'm going to go back to this slide. I'm going to back up just. You go one back, right?
Are there any elements that are missing there that are present in other hubs?
So I'm going to ask Vinay and John to comment on that. Is this a comprehensive image?
I would probably just draw attention to our final study and the specific things that we track. Now, these are just the things that are within our purview. A lot of it is on this list, but we talk about the growth of international internet bandwidth, which is that specific measure that tells you how much traffic is not just passing through, but hubbing in that location. So that could perhaps be added. If you look at our slides 5 through 14, we talk about the methodology that we're going through. Maybe gives a little bit different wording in some places, but it's basically the same thing. The one other thing I might mention is carrier presence. What's the local carrier ecosystem look like in terms of what the number and types of networks that are available in that location?
John, when you say in that location, you're talking about the mega region, right? Like
Yeah.
both in terms of, excuse me, across Richmond and the Hampton Roads region, and what types of networks are there across the board in a holistic way versus just looking at any one particular facility in terms of what are the,
definitely.
the carriers there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but otherwise, I think that from our view, that really covers it.
Yeah, one thing, maybe, reliable power, also inexpensive power. I think the cost of the power is a big factor in determining what the data center should be. I mean, I think that's an element we need to pay attention
If
to.
we were talking about any other part of the globe, I'd probably talk about pricing for network services too. But in the US generally, anywhere that you're on net is going to be fairly comparable in terms of access prices in and out of the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be fairly consistent, but yeah, the moment you talk about Europe or especially Asia, that like varies from country to country in a very big way.
And becomes a massive issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you spoke about how Virginia is very competitive, and we're missing some geographic stuff that other localities have, like, say, Seattle West on the West Coast, they have the climate that helps reduce pollution, which will reduce energy consumption. They have a lot of hydroelectric out there. Virginia's working on a mix, but the prices are very competitive. But there is geographical areas that have better prices because of what's available with natural resources and stuff.
Hey, John, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts, and obviously the power and our partners at Dominion are huge players in this whole formula. But, we talk about cables coming and landing in, of all places, Virginia Beach, which is who I work for. You got to dig down into the challenges that are surrounded physically with bringing those cables onshore and building the infrastructure out to accommodate the industry that we've invited. There's two guys right here that are actually the doers that make a lot of that stuff happen. And it's not so easy as we say cables are coming in, landing in Virginia. There's a lot of work that goes behind it and a lot of disruption that is associated with it that sometimes the citizenry doesn't really understand. So demonstrating the economic impact to Virginia and the region are critical touchstones to getting support from the community and all the consumer base, the important consumer base, but also our educational institutions and of all people, the federal government, which has such a huge footprint in Virginia and especially in Hampton Roads, and is very dependent upon that communications infrastructure for national defense, communications, healthcare, education, you name it. So that's a big part of it, in addition to getting the word out to our international partners out there.
And that's why we're gonna get to it in a few minutes, but that's why part of our recommendations includes community education and outreach. That it's not just all physical infrastructure, but the physical infrastructure is important to visualize, because this is, and again, this is meant to be a generic map. The map that we want to do is going to show the whole mega region and where those cables land and so forth. But you're right, Charlie, we've got to, it's amazing. When I first shared the story of the Global Internet Hub with some CEOs and the whole infrastructure idea, that they were scratching their heads and said, where's this story been? And I said, well, it's been with the people that are really close to it, and we've got to tell it from an economic development standpoint and associated with jobs and really, in a way, inoculate ourselves through really great education from some of the pushback that's happening in Northern Virginia right now with the data centers.
Well, let me just add one more thing. I'm sorry, Nancy. When you say jobs, we're talking about jobs that would be attracted as a result of having this infrastructure and data center in the community. And, the type of jobs that are associated with that. That's my last comment.
Yeah,
I don't promise that.
that's good. Nancy?
I was actually going the same direction. I think maybe there's another overlay on this, which is what does it mean to me?
Yes.
It shows companies that care about this capacity, that create the jobs, universities that partner, there's some like stuff on the ground that you see and you don't connect it with this.
Right.
You need to have an overlay somehow. And also for the citizenry, if this is going to be.
And that's the next section.
Yeah. But it just sort of gets people's minds. This is just a foundation. There's more to it.
That's right.
Not the end.
That's right. Any other comments on that slide?
Yeah, like a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes that's not covered in this. I spent an hour yesterday trying to convince a large supercomputer group, the world's power compute for university research. They just deployed in Phoenix. They're no different than any other Microsoft, Meta, Facebook. They are going to build their next node where they can drop it and connect to the most universities, the easiest, the quickest, and the simplest and fastest location. And I spent the afternoon trying to convince them that there's plenty of space here to develop. The old Capital One data center is down in Meadowville, completely empty, 300,000 square feet, ready for occupation. And so they're looking at the East Coast, and Ashburn is not a place they want to look at. They're looking somewhere south, and so all this stuff is happening under the hood, and it's a chicken and egg. Something's got to happen to make somebody else show up, and when somebody else shows up, the next thing drops. And if we can position everything to allow with the IXPs, the internet exchanges to help that, connecting the universe. I believe NBC carries Maria, not the Maria, I can't get the correct acronym, but it's the University Research Network. And they're going to be passing through some of the data centers in Richmond, which will allow them to have all those research groups jump on the supercompute, the hypercomputing system that's solely designed specifically for research in the universities. So each one of these little pieces we can add to the Lego blocks will make a difference.
Yeah.
I think you're to the point about low cost and reliable power. I know at our last meeting, Cushman and Wakefield just industry did it, and they looked at all the worldwide data center partners. They referenced Northern Virginia, but the way utilities work, the same price here that you have in Northern Virginia. And Virginia is 7 35 data centers, whatever the number is. But they also have sales tax. They rank for that report. It's Northern Virginia, but it's on 5.
So Virginia.
It's a great source from an independent third party of different measures and how Virginia stacks up. There's a lot of great ways selling points for that.
And John, I'll mention, Vinay and I had an hour last week with the Cushman and Wakefield data team and gave them the overview of what's happening here. They came back with a whole set of homework questions that we have to respond to.
Okay.
Stan's been helping me with a good bit of that, but all with an eye just simply to get on their radar screen.
Yeah.
Because they really do. When they Stan's exactly right. When they talk about Northern Virginia, they're talking about the entire state, and we know there's a whole lot more to that story.
Excellent. All right, well, again, after this meeting, please pass on any additional comments you have on that. The next section is really kind of what Nancy teed up, which is this other overlay, but why are we doing all that? What are the benefits for the different parties? And so this is really going to be a part of the preamble and the plan. It's like, this is what a global internet hub is, but this is why we want to be one. These are the bottom line benefits for us. And we boiled it down to 7. I'm sure they're probably 77, but these are the top ones. And again, this is where we need your help as we start to craft the language of this report. But the first is there are existing jobs in the infrastructure, and the data center industry in Virginia, it's 13,000 jobs, but it's over 45,000 when you take in, the way you do economic impact, directly supporting and indirectly. And Stephen, I don't know if you want to add to this, but this is very consistent with previous studies on the size of the industry in Virginia. And so we need to pull it down a little more to our region, but these are the primary direct jobs. Can you do that? Okay, that would be great. But that's number one. Number two, and I'm going to get my friend Scott to help me here, but this, the idea of providing faster, more reliable service as a competitive advantage, the more robust our local infrastructure is, the more content providers are going to want to store their content here on local servers. And the more we're going to be under the consideration set of on-ramps and greater local investment. And so if you're a small market and you don't have a robust digital infrastructure, you're going to Ashburn and Atlanta when you're searching your Google account or you're searching your Microsoft account. But if we have this robust infrastructure here, we're going to servers right here, and we've got the content providers storing their stuff right here. And so that's a huge benefit. That is like what this ultimately gets us to have that fast, reliable service right here. We don't have to go out of market, if you will, and have it come racing back. Is that fair, Scott?
That is fair. That is a fair assessment. And I'll give you an example, and this is a real world example. A doctor's office, multiple locations around the Richmond region. Same provider in all 17 of the locations. Their phone system on south of the river goes to Atlanta. Their phone system north of the river goes to Ashburn. The geographical distance between those two makes their phone system miserable, but it's just the way that provider routes their traffic because we haven't got enough density in Richmond. And the more density we get, the more build out of the networks, the better we'll get. But it's crazy to think that the phone calls actually sometimes are usually subpar because they're going to Atlanta and they're only 12 miles apart. So the more density we can build, and that means the more content providers will show up, the more eyeballs. It's this whole balance of the ecosystem. You supply one side of it, the other side is going to show up because it's more cost effective for them to do business.
Great. So big argument, number 6. Then number 5, it provides additional local revenue. And this is on data centers. And this is what Loudoun County is saying from data centers, $650 million coming into the county, 3% of the land base, but 30% of the tax benefits. And here's a quote from the head of economic development, said, we're not providing schools and creating roads for these data centers, but we bring in a lot of money here. And there's a ton of different reports about this. This is Loudoun and Prince William saying, for every dollar the county spends, this is how much comes in tax revenue. This is sort of their ROI. But we're also seeing other reports. This is CBRE, Economic and Fiscal Impact of Data Centers, saying, you know, $1 billion data center generates $200 million in total tax revenues over a 10-year period. All these construction jobs don't go away once it's built. You ask Meta and those folks that when we tour their place, they have almost a permanent construction business going on their lot. But that $200 million is equivalent to a corporate headquarters creating 1,700 jobs with that $130,000 salary. So it's just another way of looking at this in terms of economic impact. And Anthony, I know you try to run these numbers all the time to make a case for Henrico County. So there are a lot of studies that are out there that can make the case on ROI, and I think that we need to touch on that. And in fact, we're waiting for the release of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership report that really makes a strong case about the return on the incentives the state has done with data centers by extending that sunset law, and something that we need to do going forward to 2035 or just get rid of it, basically. So we're looking forward to that report when it comes out. We all remember in the last meeting we had an update on that. So, and the conclusion was, yes, it's a great case for ROI. Another point is this smart city development. And this was, in fact, seeking for Stephen DeBerry on our team. He was one of the information officers in Hampton Roads as they all got together for a year and studied the need for a ring. This was a major benefit to say we need to be among the smartest cities on the globe, and to have this robust network allows us to really have everything wired and to really, in terms of our safety of our citizens, our transportation system, our healthcare, our emergency response system, and in Hampton Roads, even flooding. And so this is the idea of having a robust digital infrastructure does this. And then all the work that we've done on autonomous vehicles, working for the Department of Transportation here and in other states, this is coming, autonomous vehicles, and we have to have a sophisticated digital infrastructure to make this work, so the cars don't bump into each other. And then the Internet of Things devices is expected to expand considerably in the next 7 years. And this is, you know, our refrigerators talking to our phones to say, you know, the eggs are expired, but you're shopping now, get some more eggs. So this is going to be ubiquitous. And I think a lot of us are already seeing in how we track the temperatures in our homes and so forth, but you got to have a robust infrastructure to provide these consumer benefits. And then serving underserved neighborhoods. whether it's just a really robust local network or whether it's all the way to a ring, what's happening in Hampton Roads is that more ISPs are coming to the market already saying now we can serve that last mile. We're not heavily capitalized, but we can do that, and GTS is incentivized to do this. So this was one of our major goals of our plan. How do we make sure that we have ubiquitous access to, to broadband? And then the last point is my favorite one. Having a really robust digital infrastructure, whether you're a global internet hub or not, future-proofs the community. That this technology is growing so fast that one generation of technology gets replaced by another in 3 years. I mean, this is the tip of the spear in technology. And so being a leading interconnection hub, I don't know, if you're not investing in this, I don't know how you ever catch up. And so it's really important that we think of ourselves and can point to the work that we're doing, that we really are positioning Richmond and Hampton Roads as being one of the winning communities of tomorrow. And you think about what, in terms of business, the value created that really keeps business in business. The World Economic Forum is saying 70% of the value created in the economy over the next decade is going to be enabled by digital platforms. So we have to have this to keep our economy going. And as I mentioned earlier, we're behind. So we got to be transformative here. And so I want to share with you just some other research that we've come across. This is work that Dr. Holsworth did for Go Virginia Region 4, but looking at the fastest growing jobs in the next 10 years, and you can see these technology supported jobs are really well-paying jobs, and they're on the top 10 list. And so we really want that infrastructure that can support these jobs. And we've got to put in, we've been doing all this work with the Go Virginia grant. We've got to submit a plan back to Go Virginia, and it's got to talk about new high-paying jobs. And one of the things that we've been working with Dr. Holsworth on, and a guy from George Mason University, Dr. Terry Crowder, to try to understand what jobs can be associated with digital infrastructure. So this is some new research that it's still wet. We're still working on it with those two doctors, those two PhD guys. But our hypothesis is that US regions, MSAs with the growing digital infrastructure, have a similar growth in tech talent related jobs. Now I want to tell you, as a guy that owns a research company, this is correlation, not causality, okay? But is there some sort of relationship? And so this is what we've done, working with John and Vinay. We've identified cities in the US territory that people in your business would arguably say, yeah, they are the hot digital infrastructure cities. And so our short list included Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Jacksonville, Portland. And you remember when we talked about Portland before, there's a small city that has the subsea cables coming to it that's in between Portland and Seattle, Hillsborough. So that's a market, Portland, Hillsborough. So with those cities, Telegeography, John, gave us growth data associated with assessing a digital infrastructure hub market. And so for each one of those cities, he gave us measures year by year over the past 10 years. And then we mined JobsEQ, which is a really big database on jobs that's in the economic development industry. People use it to figure out what industries are doing well or not in any particular location. So we went back and looked at tech-related jobs over the past 10 years in those cities to see if we saw some sort of correlation. So not perfect science, but John gave us a number of variables that we mapped out, and you can see how well Dallas is doing in particular, but you see this ramp up in this particular one, which is international internet bandwidth. And Denver wasn't on that list because of the, Vinay?
Yeah, just a quick point about Portland. You mentioned about Hillsborough. I mean, for those of you familiar, there are multiple subsea cables that have been landing there, more scheduled to come. And that has been a catalyst for that region to grow both terrestrial fiber in that market and also become a major data center hub for hyperscalers and for third-party data centers.
That's right.
So that's a perfect example from that perspective.
So I'll just give you a glimpse of this. Another measure was the number of carrier POPs, and this is mapped out on those cities again. And John provided a number of data centers and other measures, and all of it shows this growth similar charts showing the growth of these 5 cities. And at the same time, IP transit prices coming down, which is great. So a really wonderful story on these cities, but what does it have to do with jobs? So what we did was to look with Jobs EQ at what we're calling tech talent jobs. And so we looked at those jobs that are advertised right now, looking at those that are most open positions in America right now with LinkedIn tied to Jobs EQ. We purposely picked a very tight list. So this doesn't go, Steve, to the indirect jobs. We just said, let's just start with this very tight list and see what is happening here. And so when we boil it down to the US, the total jobs in the US that fall across this list is this number, 5.7 million. And the 10-year annual growth rate is 6.4%. And you see the wages, the average job is 111,000. So then look at those high growth digital hub markets, 7.4% average growth. And then look at Richmond and Hampton Roads. So we are lagging even the US average, but those high growth markets have even a better story. And so when we looked at this, we said, wow, well, we're growing, but just nothing like these other digital hub infrastructure cities that are really known for it in America. And so we started thinking about this and said, okay, over the next 10 years, looking at Jobs EQ, we're going to need, the United States is going to need 2.3 million software web developer programmers and testers. And you see that breakdown, huge average salary. So when we start to look at this and just apply those numbers with Richmond and Hampton Roads and take the national average, if we just jump to the national average and looked out over the next 10 years, what that could mean in net job gain, and then what Hampton Roads would look like if we just applied that national average. If we could just get to the national average, and then if we went beyond that and got to the average of the 5 digital hubs, we could really show some gains here. So this is a first cut at this data, working with those guys, but this is a way to start thinking about our conversation in terms of delivering jobs. So I'm going to stop there and see what you guys think about this, but that's the work that we're trying to finish right now.
John, two quick comments. One is the obviously very insightful and a bigger practitioner. I can relate to all of this. I think in technology, we try to create a lot of jobs in Richmond for us, and I have had challenge finding talent for various reasons, but we've grown. Dallas is a market we looked at closely, and in the entire country right now, #1 destination for tech talent, migration from Silicon Valley is Austin. #2 is Dallas, and for the very reason that you explained. The other thing is the salary that you shown actually is understated. Based on what I'm seeing in the market in the last 2 years, because a lot of things have changed. The median salary, I would say, has gone up, as I'm seeing in the marketplace, quite a bit for those roles that you have. So tremendous opportunity for our region to attract the talent and grow the average salary and high-paying jobs. That is going to be really important for the future.
One of the low-hanging fruits that's out there that's been kind of left to the side. We're in Mary, Old Dominion. There's quite a few universities down there. Density of eyeballs. All those universities joining together and saying, we want an exchange in Virginia Beach, Norfolk.
Yeah.
All of our eyeballs are going to be at one location. Come please meet us. That's simple low-hanging fruit, adding a couple 100,000 eyeballs to one point, one place. If you want to group that and bring it to Richmond, then you've now got close to
All the universities.
all the universities.
Yeah.
So adding all those eyeballs with very few connections and putting them in one place is going to bring the other half of the table to the game. Simple low-hanging fruit. Universities need to ask their IT departments, their heads need to go, does it make sense to exchange? Does it help the university with our connectivity? If it does, why are we not doing it right now to make this region it's bringing everybody to the table, and when they all show at the same table, the other stuff shows up.
Yep.
I would piggyback on that from the workforce development side. I know you guys probably didn't dig into much in the granularity of the numbers, but talking about the equitable growth piece and saying how many people are we bringing in from the outside versus how many of these jobs are we bringing from within the state. I'd be curious if there were major differences in those regions based on the layout of the higher education systems I just think in terms of supporting that rapid growth, you can only pull in so much, right? And there was
Yeah.
actually really from the inside.
That's a great point.
Liberty University, I don't know if they still have the largest online platform for external students, but they joined the AIX for that sole reason, to be able to have the lowest latency to get to the most people for their educational platform that was external university. And now they're still a member of DKIX, and that's tying those jobs together, the education part of it. But they joined solely because of their external platform facing outside of the university doing classes.
John, I think that this is going to be very helpful, and I'm really glad that you guys have done this because it's part of the translation exercise that we have, because all of our economic development announcements we get, it's how much money are they spending and how many jobs are they creating? Well, that doesn't fit really nicely with this conversation, even though we all know it's incredibly important for the future of the economy. So helping translate this, I think, is really important. I don't want to get too distracted with what you're doing, but I wonder if there's a way to pull Jobs EQ into the whole construction, the infrastructure side of this. And maybe it's not Jobs EQ, maybe it's just something that we do manually.
That's what we're going to have to do because we've tried. And unfortunately, Jobs EQ and Lighthouse, the other one that's ERSI merged into, the construction jobs aren't segmented construction jobs high end for data centers. But I welcome your help on this. In fact, what we wanted to do is take our full analysis, and Dr. Clower, unfortunately, the last 2 weeks has had to deal with a medical situation, but put together a separate report and send it to everybody in the next 2 weeks that really goes a little deeper in what you're seeing here. But I think you're exactly right. What I learned at Meta when we took a tour out there at their last meeting, they were using a number like 1,000 construction jobs that had happened here to build out, but they stay in place. And if they're not at Meta, they go across the street to QTS.
Since 2017.
Yeah. And so we have to include that in here somehow. So that's what I want to do, is put together a report just on that. I was hoping, Steve, I was hoping your report would come out and we could send both of them to everybody, because that needs to be part of our why.
When you're making the link with the growth of the broader tech sector, it is important to keep in mind that digital infrastructure is it's sufficient. It's necessary, but not in itself going to create the good. There's a lot of other factors that go into that, the workforce development, the quality of life. So I think that the data centers alone are your ROI for digital infrastructure. Like I wouldn't want, because the causal link is a little bit more tenuous when you start saying, well, subsea cables, you're going to be the next Silicon Valley. There is some real logic there, and I think it's worth talking about, but I also wouldn't want to undermine the very obvious case that data centers alone are your ROI.
Okay. What did you guys think about the 7 arguments that we did before this? When you saw those, did that make sense to you in terms of the why? You see the benefits not only to individuals, but also to businesses and to jurisdictions. Sector. Yep.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the internet hubs and growth rates?
The internet.
Dallas and Jacksonville, just the line chart there. In the back. Yeah, so that one. The next one, sorry. Very interesting, and actually Stephen is the source of all this type of information for us. We look at this very closely. And we look at competitor states, as you know, and all the Portland authority would be in that group. And I guess I'm wondering more about the details of job growth that this sparks. And I think I look at that and say, well, Dallas is on fire with everything.
Yep.
Texas is on fire. Florida's on fire. Jacksonville actually is not doing that well. I don't know a lot about the Portland market. And I think more of the evidence of the connectivity of this to the job creation, the data center thing, I get that. It's a great economic outcome. But who's coming? How, as we look at this hub, I feel like we need more on convincing people of the causality of
Yeah.
if we do this, that. So, because I want to know what other cities in the markets we look at, the competitor framework, is Nashville growing at a more rapid rate? That's one that's going on fire also. What do we directly connect to this? And that'd be helpful to me. But I think you've got to really be able to say that this has the payoff outside of data centers, which
Right.
is about storage. Other, in our stuff that we're doing right now strategically with VEDP, we're very focused on that high-end jobs around services and software and cyber and AI. And I think that VEDP has been historically more on sites and kind of heavy stuff.
Right.
But the job growth over the next 10 decades is going to be in this stuff.
Right.
Businesses. And so it's really going to resonate, I think, if we can move back to how do we do that and create a kind of unique strategic focus on that.
So
Yeah, I think you hit a key point there when you mentioned that the payoff is, beyond data centers. To Shamim's point, he's not here, from CarMax. He's talking about CarMax being a digital company. I've spoken to a couple of people at Bank of America and their management team. They're actually looking at Bank of America no longer as a bank, but as a data company in terms of how critical it is for their business in terms of, on digital infrastructure. So I think, John, across industries, picking up, some examples to cite those, I think it's important to bring that out a bit more. Of course, people know that this infrastructure is industry agnostic, so to speak, right? But I think really kind of coming up with some real life case studies. Like when I met with the guy here, Shamim is his name, right? John from CarMax. The first thing he said, like even in the introduction, was like, we are completely a digital company now, right? So I think those kind of things are really important. And in order for businesses to do that effectively, scalably, and in a cost-effective manner, it's so important for this infrastructure to be there.
And Secretary, and it's the concept of how do we start to create more ecosystems. Nova has that, it's just evolving over time. Richmond, which is growing nicely now, but it's been lagging up until most recently, is how do we start to create some ecosystems that are not company specific, but this stuff, it's biotech, things that is already a bit of a critical mass.
Yep.
But we do things that start to really feed those ecosystems in the, say, the supply chain that's around them. I think that's what this feels like. It naturally feeds, but I think
be careful with Dallas, because Dallas has a unique geographical reason why they're accelerating. They're attached to Mexico, so terrestrial cables can come across very easily. So Atlanta, Portland, and Jackson are very similar to us. Atlanta, not so much because of the coastal. But Jacksonville is taking off. We should be able to trim and run neck and neck with Portland and Jacksonville.
Yeah.
If we put the pieces in
We don't have
place.
data on it. We don't have data on it.
Georgia, Dallas, as a state, they're growing at 50 to 100% faster than we are.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to get to is, can we do some more things that can convince people that
Yeah.
no.
So Chuck, so what I said was pick some of the markets that we really go head to head in. Charlotte and Nashville and Orlando and right.
Just to build on that point of comparing the different markets, and one of your points earlier, playing catch up in these really narrow generational windows, essentially. I think being able to tie the causality is important to even justify it, but then being able to differentiate it from why we're going to do something other than play catch up. You know, we're going to do X, Y, or Z to remain ahead or kind of jump out front because they'll still remain a competition. So what's the thing that is not just matching, but trying to outmaneuver or outsmart? Because that was one thing that seemed missing for me in terms of what was different from these other markets. What do we have that they don't?
Gentlemen,
One of the, just one limitation that we have on this analysis is that telegeography doesn't have the same data for Richmond and Hampton Roads, together or separately. We just have the big markets. But we do have the jobs data for Richmond and Hampton Roads.
you can put the growth rate, that was on the wrong chart. I know this is bandwidth, but the chart that shows the actual growth rates, numbers chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason we didn't have Myrtle Beach in there, I know that they're not growing right now, but they're starting to, because that's going to turn into a junior Richmond. Because of the subsea cables coming in that are going to Atlanta, they're building terrestrial. So I can see that being something we can train heavily
Yeah,
against.
I mean, this is jobs EQ data, so we could do any market that we want. I mean, we can.
In terms of comparing tech development and jobs EQ data, though, we don't have data on Myrtle Beach yet.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's not there yet, but you're absolutely right.
Right.
You know, with the two subsea cables already planned to land there, with the work DC Blocks is doing, not just from a CLS perspective, but also terrestrial fiber. There's a
Right.
data center company that's investing in terrestrial fiber, connecting the CLS to hyperscale data centers to make it easy for them to connect back to the international traffic that will be landing in Myrtle Beach. But that's really forward-looking thinking. And Scott, you're absolutely right. Over the next 10 years, it's going to have a significant impact to the East Coast traffic landscape as well.
If Myrtle Beach is doing something, we should be matching them step for step or ahead of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is probably not another reason for why you should do this work, but there's still a lot of people I talk to that don't understand. You already have a lot of this here. If we don't take advantage of it, it's our loss.
Right.
It doesn't have this. Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Right.
paying people to move there. We don't have that problem. So, but having complacency or any slowness in adopting this opportunity is going to have an opportunity cost.
That's right, a loss, yeah. Well, we can quickly update this and do our direct competitors as well as all the internet hubs in the US, right? Because this is Jobs EQ. We don't need your data for that. So the key, though, is really running this list. We started off, being very select, and this is Dr. Holsworth and Dr. Clower and SIR saying, okay, what is the small group that we create that defines tech talent? So Stephen, I'd welcome your input on this as well, because we can run any SOC codes as this de facto group of tech talent. So we'll do that. So look forward to a week from now, getting a more robust report from us that uses these two tools, and then making the case. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next section, which is going to be reviewing the findings from our consultants. So let me just say, lunch is going to be here in about a half an hour, and it's going to be set up out here, and it comes, we're talking about making an impact on our total planet. Our lunch comes right next door from Lee's. So it's fantastic chicken, and it's going to be set up in this room back here. And so what I'm thinking, just to give us the most amount of time, is that once lunch is set up, then we'll take a break and everybody grab lunch, come back here, and we'll just keep going and keep the meeting going. So what we have remaining here is 25 minutes or so from each global internet and telegeography to really share the gestalt of what each firm has learned. And then after that, we're going to go into our 10 strategies and really talk about each strategy, and then wrap up with what do we do next. So that's the remaining part of the day. So I see you guys are all paying attention. The energy level's still high. Let's keep going. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And if anybody needs a nature break, just take it. But we're going to probably stop after the first one. And lunch should probably be set up. So, we're probably going to get our lunch at 11:45, and then we'll do the second part and then go into the strategies. So I want to say at this time just how much I have appreciated working with these two gentlemen. This has been a team effort, and you guys promised to work together, and boy, have you. And so it really has been tremendous. And you've done a number of reports. You guys all have their reports. Just so you know, I want you to be very careful, especially with John's report. We have permission to share it with this group as steering committee members and with the RVA 757 Connects board, but not to share all of John's work except the one document that says public document. And John is going to, and Vinay will read our draft report, just like you guys will, and then we'll comment and suggest edits. And John in particular will make sure he's comfortable with everything that we put in there. So we're good on that? Yep. All right, John.
All right. I think most of you have probably heard a lot about the findings of this so far. I'm just trying to think what would be the most effective way to go through this really quickly to distill it down to our key findings. John has already touched on a lot of the methodology that we've looked at. When you look at what makes a global interconnection hub, this is really what we were evaluating in our report. Doing 10 case studies, comparing those on different hubs, existing hubs and up and coming hubs, comparing those to the mega region and talking about what we see, what we would like to see more of in terms of what creates a healthy interconnection market in the region. There are a lot of technical terms flying around in the report. It's a long report, it's dense, but we tried to really distill it down to make it as practical as possible. To talk about what we see in the different markets, what the key highlights are about those markets, and what the takeaways are for the mega region in terms of what you can learn from those specific locations and what you could build on. So it's the same formula for each market as you go through it. The methodology is the same. The added piece, other than looking at the interconnection market itself, is looking at the subsea landing market for the East Coast, which my colleague Alan Malden put together. So I think in the interest of time, I just want to give us a quick snapshot view. And you have the condensed version, which is available to the public. But I'm going to focus, I think, first off, and maybe mostly, and very briefly here, on slides 141 and 142 of the full report, which give the really key takeaways, I think, for the mega region, and give references to the specific markets that can be compared for those takeaways. So this is just a visual of some of the metrics that we tracked in this report. International internet bandwidth. Again, how much router-to-router cross-border traffic is actually hubbing in a given location. That just tells us how much connectivity is there between other markets and this market. And as you can see, Hong Kong and Marseille are huge by those measures. And Jakarta for a smaller market is very big as well, and Sofia. The RVA 757 region is very small, but by this measure is actually the fastest growing by far. With the cables coming into Virginia Beach, you're starting, of course, from a smaller base, but the traction being gained in terms of traffic that's coming here, landing here, not just passing through, but being hubbed in this market is growing tremendously. I think about 70-some% compounded annually over the last couple of years.
So the fastest growing international bandwidth market in North America, or in the ones that you've studied?
Of the ones that we're studying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm on this list. We're growing faster than anybody else.
Right. I'm going to probably switch over to let me just switch over to this slide. because you can kind of see the visual representations here. Number of data centers, we know where we stand. Number of cloud on-ramps, none in this region. Number of IXs, there's diversity of internet exchange platforms in the different markets. There are 2 here. One of them is very, very small. The Ninja IX platform, which I think is in Norfolk and Richmond. But the DKIX being the main one. I really want to focus, I think, on the recommendations and kind of tie it all together and reiterate what these different things that we're tracking mean to the region. To piggyback on what's already been said by several folks, John, Scott, and others, I think that the biggest takeaway that we got in looking at this and looking at this region compared to the others that we tracked was that you want to start local, cultivate the local network market here. You've already got the foundation with the IX that's here, with some of the data centers that are here. But what we don't see here compared to some of the other markets that we're tracking are a tremendous amount yet of network connection happening here. When you look at peering platforms, they are a tremendous benchmark for what's happening in the market because they're transparent for the most part, with a few exceptions of private operators. Internet exchanges are public platforms that publicly broadcast what's happening in them. So you can do a quick and easy comparison of yourself at any other market you want and say, okay, what are the major peering platforms in this market? Who's there? How many networks are there? Who specifically is there? How much traffic is going through that exchange? You can, they publicly broadcast this on their websites. So if you do that comparison, we're relatively small here. We're at a growth phase, but we're very small compared to some of the other markets. So what that means is that given the proximity to Ashburn, a lot of the interconnection that is needed for this region is happening in Ashburn. You want to attract more of that locally. And as a number of you have already worked very deliberately to start that process, that needs to continue. And you know, in this chicken or egg sort of thing, every component of this interconnection environment, every type of player in this market is watching each other to see what's developing. And so when you start with what you already have, with the data centers, with the networks that are available, with the local enterprises, research institutions, government agencies that need connectivity, as they start to hub their network deployments here, then others are taking notice of that. Of course, as you see more of that happening, you have a need for more peering infrastructure. You have a need for more data centers. You have a need for more network to intermesh all of this. And when you look at some of the other markets that we have highlighted in this study, you look at that first bullet, local peering network interconnection. Hong Kong, Marseille, Kuala Lumpur, Mumbai, Jakarta, Sofia, these are all markets that have a tremendous amount of peering happening within those localities. You have a lot of networks connecting to each other, and really a peering platform is just a means to, it's a network layer that allows for expedited interconnection between networks. It makes the whole thing easier and faster. So the more you see that happening in a local market, the better. And in all of these markets, you have multiple IXs sitting in multiple data centers that are intermeshed with each other, so that if you pop into one IX and one data center, you have access to partners in all the other data centers that are peering to that same platform. So you have this incredibly robust intermeshed local ecosystem. So that's one of the very biggest takeaways. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Who are the sponsors of doing that? Who are the investors?
And the peering platforms themselves?
To build that local peering interconnection network.
They're generally, they're public organizations for the most part. Sometimes they're run by research institutions. Sometimes they're just run by a public body. they're often not as in government institutions, but just nonprofit organizations.
How can we stimulate that?
That's in our plan.
Start with what
Like
we
getting
have
the
with
universities together.
Yeah,
But universities too.
Yeah, Secretary Cummins, that's where we start with, as John said, with DKIX, which is already in this market as a global interconnection platform. But also, there are times when you have specific data center operators making that investment, specific terrestrial fiber providers, because ultimately that peering fabric comprises of course, it's going to be housed inside a data center. You've got to need terrestrial fiber to connect it to other existing locations like Scott Brown's facility in Ashland, like the QTS NAP, for example. So there's a terrestrial fiber component aspect to it. And then you have the entity that's operating that internet exchange. So that's where currently in this market, we have DKIX. In some markets, as an example, you could have a nonprofit organization that puts together an internet exchange. The key value of an internet exchange is the amount of members that are connected to it. So that's very important. The community has to back it up.
So have states that aren't been a direct or indirect sponsor of building those then?
I don't think so. Not that I know of.
Mostly universities have made.
Universities, yeah.
Yes,
The
yeah.
universities have benefited the most, so they have been actively involved in internet exchange
Yeah.
points.
So Richmond had, the first one was RVAX, Richmond Virginia Internet Exchange. Myself and 4 of the companies started, it was a nonprofit. We realized that we were struggling to attract the larger content providers, and it's just as simple as paperwork. DKIX, one of the reasons why we actually turned over that to DKIX is because DKIX, I think they're in 35 countries. For them, for Microsoft to deploy a new connection to another exchange, it was a checkbox on their paperwork that they already had executed. For us, it was Microsoft, and we all know all the correct people. They're like, you don't understand what the paperwork takes to get through our process. If you've got someone that already has our paperwork done, it's a checkbox. And it's just a simple check and send it with them. And so that's why RVAX decided to let DKIX run with this charge to make this region a more connected region with content in the region. And it's going to take time, but it is happening.
And to give you a quick perspective, as I mentioned earlier, the value of an internet exchange is based on the number of members connected to it. DKIX as a platform has 3,850 different networks connected to it as a platform globally, right? So to build it locally in Richmond, there's a good industry recognition. There's a good proven model that the DKIX has done around the world in 24 different countries, multiple markets. And that's what we are trying to build here now.
Yeah.
Just so you understand that, like the pipes and the connections, it's really kind of convoluted how it all works together. But for us, when we had the RVAX, that was the members connected to the members.
Yeah.
Now that DKIX has come in, our facility connects into DKIX. We also connect into DKIX New York, DKIX Dallas, DKIX Chicago, DKIX Germany, all over their platform. And because their platform is interconnected across the US, it's the most cost-effective way for us to move traffic to those locations or pick up traffic to those locations. And that's that whole ecosystem. The more eyeballs you stick on the DKIX platform or whatever our IX is in Richmond that's going, the more eyeballs you stick on there, the more the content providers are going to want to connect into that platform closer, because latency is the magic, the magic behind it. If you're driving a car at 65 miles an hour down the highway and Starbucks wants to ping you with a discount for the next exit, if that equipment that's going to send that advertisement out is too far away, when they ping you, you're 3 exits past it. So that's why that content, the way digital advertising is working, it has to be proximity based. That's why DKIX picks Richmond. From the DKIX New York exchange, if you draw concentric rings, Ashburn was wasting territory. They could go further down. Richmond was the next concentric ring where they still interconnected. The next one is Dallas, to make sure that they can cover almost, I think it's 80% of the population by being in 3 places. And that's the cheapest for, if you're a Microsoft or you're one of the content providers, if you can be in 3 locations and cover the entire East Coast instead of 6, big difference in economy of scale. Pricing is much more cost effective. So that's why this whole ecosystem, the more eyeballs you slam on there, and the eyeballs are the first things that need to show up. The content providers are not going to come open the eyeballs.
So Liberty is on the exchange, but one of the things in our recommendations is to get the universities together to talk about this.
Also, so is Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously Secretary Cummings eyeballs representing Xfinity, Verizon, Fios, all the end user networks that are connected to our respective homes and businesses. We have them connected so the content is distributed in a scalable, effective, fast way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So, right. And so really it's about connecting networks locally as opposed to sending them to Ashburn or somewhere else. And it's typically done, Secretary Cummings, by nonprofits. That's the short answer to that. As far as starting local is concerned, I mean, this is really, really critical too, I think. It's wonderful. You're already at a stage where you have a DCAS. You have the international player coming in and investing in this localized market. But to have the local university systems and others invest in figuring out how they can solve their problems by connecting here versus connecting somewhere else, especially in a constrained market like Ashburn. This is an extraordinary time to be really working on a project like this. Fortuitous in the sense that you can both help with Ashburn's problems and kind of capitalize on them. They are really constrained in how much they can grow until they get new transmission routes in place for power. And so that gives a lot of momentum to the idea of getting some of that access here.
I just, there's a bit of one dose of reality though, and my friend Stan is here, so I want to be careful, but we are hearing concern in the industry. So that, yes, there's an opportunity, no question there, but we are hearing concern in the industry in the Richmond area because of what's happened in Loudoun. Irrespective of the power capacity that we have here, there is a concern about what that could potentially mean for folks making an investment down the road. And until things are solved in Loudoun, there could potentially be an impact throughout the entire state.
That's something to, that's a major issue of concern for sure.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
That's a great point. And, but one of the things I think we really need to bring out up front, Stan can attest to this, is our future diversity in power supply brought on by alternative energy.
Yeah.
And the storage capabilities that follow that. We found that a lot of the European companies that are coming to Virginia to look for opportunity associated with alternative energy have customers that follow them around the globe. And these are data center related. They're a variety of different folks that we've had contact with. So we talk about all these other communities, but none are going to be connected to the largest wind energy farm along the U.S. East Coast managed by these guys over here. So that's a huge ace up our sleeves, not to mention when you look at Austin and Dallas, not that you want to sell from a negative perspective, but Texas in and of itself is challenged with its power infrastructure. I can't attest to all of the deficiencies therein, but I'm sure our friends in the energy business can.
And it's a long-term play with all of these things. Everything here is going to take time, and perhaps more time because of the issues that the state is dealing with in terms of power, but also in terms of, like you said, when you build up these alternatives, it all takes time. But I think the really important thing about
Can I add to your comments? So it's not just because of what demand is growing so fast.
Right.
And it takes, it's an urban environment. So to build big transmission infrastructure.
Right.
It's very long. And earlier, you talked about point of outcry. So what's happening is you can't build infrastructure fast enough.
Right.
What's beautiful about this, our region we're looking at is you got big residential hubs on both ends, but it's not a lot between them. So building
The mega sense.
is easy. It's not just Anthony to your point. It's not Henrico, it's any of the data center areas.
Sure.
However, I will say this, in the last 3 weeks, Hillsborough called me, their biggest utility, because they have the same problem. Arizona Public Service called me, because they're having the same problem.
Absolutely.
We serve Chicago, which is a big data center market, so this is not,
No.
it's shocked everybody, it's
Yep.
the number one market
Yep.
in the world. That's
Right.
the issue. That's what's
Yep.
not people alive, but it's, the first question we get is, hey, what's the story of this area of White Oak? Just give us
Yeah, I'm gonna
some
say something.
perspective. Texas is different. Texas has a generation problem. And their gas-fired plants keep freezing and they can't supply energy. Ours is a transmission issue.
Right.
Right. And that's what we put in the report.
Yep.
Stan. Let's all hold our questions so John can clip through the rest of these, so we'll stay on schedule, and then we'll open it up for
Sure.
discussion.
And I'm not going to take too long, I don't think, because this is real brief. So with those things in mind, I think there's a bigger point to make about starting local right now, and it reiterates the issue with building up that local peering ecosystem. When you look at a lot of these, and I highlighted Manchester and Hamburg, if you go through the report and look at those, you have this tremendous anchor in local data center peering networking environments that the international community has built into. So when you start local and start with where you are, given the constraints that you have, building up the assets that you have already in place, that can be the foundation for what can come as some of the constraints are relieved. And if you, one of the, Hamburg stands out to me. They have multiple very localized data center operators who only operate in Hamburg or in Germany, along with international players. And when you look at the major peering points where the IXs meet, some of those are in very localized facilities. So there's a lot going on with that you can capitalize on. Looking at your gateway status, I think, is really key. So building beyond that, look at where you sit, look at the traffic that's moving through, how you can capture that in a more localized way. You look at places like Marseille and Mumbai, they are at these transcontinental gateways, and so are you. But not only that, you're at an East Coast gateway. You have traffic flowing north and south that you can capture. The subsea landing diversity goes along with that. Looking at where you stand as a gateway, and this ties in also to the part that Alan talks about in the subsea assessment. When hyperscalers and major carriers are looking at where they want to land cables, they want diversity. You are a diversity play right now. It won't be entirely the case as you build up, as you attract more cables. There's only so far that can go. But the degree to which you can attract the potential you can attract for subsea cable development by making it easier to access the local landings, by diversifying the landings that the potential places that you have for landing, that helps you capitalize on getting more of that traffic flowing through here. And as it flows through, figuring out how to capture more of that traffic locally as you build up the local ecosystem. Data center diversity, I think, is a really key one for us here as well. That's an area that has started but could certainly expand more. If you look at a lot of these markets, you have a tremendous mix. All data centers are not the same, right? So you have data centers that are solely focused on hyperscale. You have those that are solely focused on enterprise or predominantly. You have some that are more wholesale focused, some that are more retail focused, some that are purely interconnection focused. So there are all kinds of data centers out there. And there's a place for each of those types of sites. So looking at the types of operators, how you can get them interconnected, intermeshed well, so that they can encourage each other in building a local ecosystem while having a diversity of route access to bigger hubs, to places like Ashburn, so that you have this incredibly robust infrastructure throughout and multiple tiers of data center operators within the market. The more, the better. Attracting cable access, I'm going to leave that more to Vinay because he had an amazing point, I think, in his study about this and how to work with landings, to coordinate between landings and data centers to make sure that you're able to hub things locally as much as possible. And I think that's an area that you can be working on really here very, very soon, very much immediately. Lastly, maybe a bit on a downer note, understanding the pitfalls, doing things intentionally, but realizing that just because you have a lot of IXs, just because you have you're in a prime landing spot, doesn't mean everything's going to take off. Barcelona is maybe less of an example here, Lisbon more so. What's really, I think, intriguing about Lisbon is that it's a major subsea landing hub, but there's very little, if any, activity going on in that market. It's all passing somewhere else. So that's a great one to maybe look at as a case study, as far as like understanding that just because you put all these pieces in place doesn't mean that you're going to see tremendous activity right off the bat. So I think it's important to really emphasize something like that as we look at all of these things. That's really all I have.
Questions for John?
Yeah, what didn't Lisbon do the same state?
I can't really answer that, except that from the limited view that I have, there just isn't a robust operating environment there. From what we can see, they have one IX that's run by an education organization. There's a fair amount of traffic. There's a fair amount of carrier presence. Equinix has acquired a data center operator that has a POP there, but there isn't a lot more growth beyond that. So there's just not a lot of demand right there, as far as I know.
Yeah, and just to kind of qualify that a little bit further,
I'm not doing that.
Equinix has their own internet. They're a data center operator, so they have their own internet exchange points as well, which are not necessarily distributed or open access. So they are specific to within their four walls.
Right.
So I think having that open access, having that distributed architecture is extremely important. And one other thing that from a Lisbon perspective, how the region is shaping is Sines, which is another region in Portugal south of Lisbon. There's a new subsea cable that's going to connect Lisbon to Sines. Lisbon has more data centers. Sines is now attracting both data center and subsea cables, but it has to be more built on an open architecture manner.
And that may be speculative. We don't know.
All right, we got a question from Pat. Pat Cody. Pat.
You spoke on the diversity of the cable landings. How important within a given market like Hampton Roads is diversity of cable landing stations?
Well, you know, that was interesting. We had a really good conversation with my colleague Alan and John about this. Unfortunately, you're limited in terms of this specific region in terms of what would practically be considered cable landing diversity. There's maybe one other location.
I think
that you're
John, to
exploring.
qualify, he's talking about cable landing station.
Yeah.
As a CLS versus
We are.
just the beach manhole, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Pat is talking about the CLS versus the beach manhole.
Right.
Well, yeah, I think it's this. I think I don't know, the beach manhole versus CLS. It's a matter of having a diversity of places to land your cables. But but in terms of practicality in getting from the manhole to the CLS, you're fairly limited in terms of geography where you can do that.
Right. And we're going to talk more about that when we get to the recommendations, because we know from their study, Alan has told us there are going to be 10 to 12 more cables on the East Coast coming up in the next 10 years. And we got to be packaged as brilliantly as possible to try to get our fair share. Any other questions for John?
There's a question.
Yep.
You were talking before about the importance of universities getting on this. Is there any strategy that some cities or some places have done that are more effective than others? Because that would be crucial for us.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really don't know. That's beyond my purview, really. Yeah.
I can say a lot of it started with the university IT people recognizing how the plumbing works and knowing that they need to, like, I think Minneapolis had to go to Chicago. It was a huge traverse to get there. And so they actually were, I think they donated equipment, funding to start the exchange, and it's nice, the exchange out there. And so, no, it hasn't. It's, depending on your level of knowledge, some IT people go, okay, I need just an internet connection.
The only thing I would say about that quickly is that the research and education networks have their own parallel internet universe. It's really extraordinary, right?
Yes.
And so it reflects often the geographical needs of the broader market too. So you see big university exchanges in really big hub markets. You see transcontinental traffic being carried by international research groups. So
let me answer the
problems.
question. I've had 2 university presidents in our mega region that are aware of what we're doing and saying, come to me when you're finished and tell us what to do. So we've got an opportunity here. But let me keep going here because I want us to eat.
It's the best story.
So,
One quick thing, that the university aspect. What's
that, Anthony? Right. Anthony, do you have a question?
Yes, hi. This is Tony Stefanidis from Williamsburg. I'm sorry that I could not join you today. I had some other things to do here. So I think that the role of the universities is twofold. One, as a consumer of data. The second is also as an innovator, right? I think that this is an effort that will transform the region. And I think that the universities, especially the local ones with their particular standing in the community, can play a transformative role as well on how the whole region is moving together with it.
Yes.
We are addressing issues that relate to equitable growth, integration of the region, et cetera, so that we do become the mega region that we all want to be.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to just share these slides, not only because I love looking at cities, but all of the recommendations that John's group has come up with, we've incorporated into the plan that you guys have seen, that we're going to go over this afternoon. And you see the key takeaways for the committee on each one of the insights from each market, trying to figure out how to make sure our plan is informed the right way. And that idea of these new cables coming ashore, that Alan, your guy is the international expert helping locations and cable decision makers figure out what markets make the most sense. And so he's thinking 10 to 12 cables in the next 10 years on the East Coast. And we need to get ready for that opportunity. So I'm going to turn it over now to Vinay. But before Vinay, why don't we all get lunch real quick? It's going to be a buffet line. Come back here. Do a nature break if you got the calling, but then we'll come back here, and then Vinay, you'll talk while we're having lunch. Is that okay? So, lunch break. Everybody go to the buffet line and then come back to your place, and we'll keep going. Yeah.
Get on with it. I was in Belmont. Yeah. Hi. It's good to hear it. From a practical. Yes. I'm not too far off. That's a while ago. Yeah, but I've never forgotten class. It was the best class. I appreciate that. Getting up. First day. Angelo Johnson. Yeah. Awesome. I want to come up here and say you're an angel. But I want you to. I've never had that before in a class.
Somebody else is.
That's so much there. How long have you been with Carmack?
18 interesting. From Virginia, I think. I'm sure you see right up there. I had only 2 in my notes. So. Well, very light.
My oldest son actually. John, management accounting now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well,
So you in the IT side?
That's the part of the story and the working.
all of the technology.
I can nobody
But it was some smaller public report. I got the one versions of Vinay's report. And the report that you guys use. Right, so beyond the data science.
And all the challenges.
So this is all of,
Oh, because we have this issue. All that
most of marketing, the product side of marketing.
Today, what about the Navy, or, you know, maybe understand more about.
So,
I think it's pretty important, university thing, because it's already happening.
The building.
They just haven't sort of put it out there.
Well, they have versions of it now.
And then I also, one of my former students, I guess she worked with
And a lot of the like
the other trainer.
stuff. And
Yep.
then there's
Yeah.
the VCU's next to the 5-year grant. And
Yeah, so this one is probably the big one, it's 21.9 days.
But this place is just so beautiful.
So
Let me send the other one.
it'll be
How difficult was sort of
Ordered
the, retrofitting?
Yeah, well, there'll be a whole place to plug it in, and that's.
And there's certain standards.
Not in any of it. So there's-
smaller version.
This is the summary version. The basic size of it showing up. Summary version,
We had to work around that.
is the public document. You can
And
share
it's
with
not-
them.
IT guys have been involved in the.
Firewall.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, they're not.
May take a minute.
Wi-Fi.
It can.
Right. Solid wall.
That's really big report.
Wall. Run a lot of cable.
If you have a chance to drop off or something.
Yeah, right.
You there?
Good, how are you?
Didn't work all.
Like this is all once.
We got some time to work on it. How long?
I know, that's good. Right. You get some, okay.
Like a third year.
Go get some chow. Bob and David, you guys want to get some
Yeah, I'm gonna
food?
pass. I have a lunch at one. I gotta.
Okay. David, want to get some food?
Okay.
How long?
Great seeing you.
Charlie, guys, you guys want to get some food?
Anyway, the only one on there is.
Want to get some food?
He would be ideal.
I'm Greg. You're a GE. You're it. Me.
Sure, you know, however they want to hear it.
You guys want to get some food?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
When I was driving here, I was like, I hope we got these chicken.
Yes, we
No,
can
we're
at least.
not.
Yes, exactly. Because you told us to, that's why.
I love these chicken, and I haven't had it since.
Good, thank you. Good to see you, Bob.
Hey, good to see you.
Finally, to put a face with a name and all that good stuff. How you doing?
I've met 3 times before.
Yeah, I guess so. The Williamsburg thing.
Sorry, that's in the CD.
Hi, everyone. I'm good. Are you doing? I know. It's very convenient.
And what's your role, Sabrina? Pardon me? Okay. Thank you. So have you been involved with the project since the beginning?
I missed a few meetings. Yes. Try to come when I can.
Pardon me?
I said I try to come when I can.
Yeah. It's a big group.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, very much. Scott Brown?
Hey, good to see you.
Very good to see you too. What's shaking in your world?
Good stuff. We've got a lot of new circuits coming back in.
Yeah?
Yeah, a lot more eyeballs. One of our electric co-ops is actually going to be the back end for another electric co-op, which is going to add another 20,000 homes on the network. So it's been really, really good.
So what kind of recommendations? They're going to be, I keep hearing the chicken and the egg and what needs to, is it going to be, that 10 recommendations in here next? They're going to be, these need to come first. We have prioritized, there's a chart that has the 10 recommendations prioritized. Like, what's the first 2 years, what's the second 30? I feel like there's a lot of things we need to do, like, with what we already have to build that up, to draw more people in that would allow us then to get the investment.
Yeah.
The other thing, okay.
Gary's really.
Yeah, Gary and I talked a couple of weeks back. I was in DC for some meetings, and I called him.
I know.
He's a great guy. Really like him.
No, I did.
Of the
I need him.
Yeah.
This is really.
Well, whatever.
I'll start as soon as people get in.
Noah?
I am. Yeah, so it just seemed like a perfect time to come over, you know.
For the SSC code stuff.
So, Nancy, hi.
How are you doing? Good to see you.
Whole profile.
So you are with the group.
I would, yeah.
So our organization,
Data center too.
yeah, so is the support organization for Region.
And I'm sure.
Okay.
Like we've got.
So there are 9 regions.
How are you doing, man? Yeah.
So we're one of the funders.
Okay.
So I'm kind of wearing a bunch of hats here.
Sure. Important hat. Yeah.
You have to get it from there. Well, that's the public law.
Thank you.
What is
Yeah, so I'm the president of Reinvent Hampton Roads. I don't know if you ever knew, did you know Jim Spoor? Okay, well, he retired back in the summer. And the board approached me, they want to reinvent, which is what we're doing. Basically, we're a regional organization. 2 things we do. One is we're really all about sort of the strategic, hence being here, some strategic activity we need to bring here to the roads, really on economic development, innovation, and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And then we also are the support organization for global. So we specifically, you know, we're putting together right now the Hampton Roads Business Partnership, and there is putting them both together as one organization.
All right, thanks.
That would have corporates, that crowd, university presidents, because they are often missing.
Nice to meet you too. You're excited to talk. Okay.
Systemically, we have one or the other.
Now I'm
And then
with.
you.
Oh my
gosh. Often,
I always remember.
aren't together.
I was
So
actually,
we're together on the board
I did my
and are
PhD
focusing
here.
on really very strategic.
I saw his name.
We're looking to audit out
So I
migration.
was hoping I get to.
What other problem is.
Okay.
But then I also bought a place down in Norfolk.
So
because
we're taking a look at that. We're looking at how can we step
Previously
up
leading
some of the federal
wholesale,
regional funding
person
in economic
down there.
development. Don't fit into any one bucket.
He's a fabulous teacher.
So I
Things like with
switched
EDA.
out of that a couple
we're
months ago.
looking at tech hubs and
You.
things like that.
Yeah.
And
Still got to
then
keep the same email, so I'll give you an update.
supporting a number of really important initiatives in making sure that
Yeah, I have a, funny, because this story
we
is
have an
fascinating to watch.
organization
I grew up in Wilmington.
called Friends of JLab, and our
In
job
my undergrad.
is basically when that RFP comes out, which, you know,
Just encourage what there.
JLab to respond to for the
Existed in the corridor.
that we have a committee
And what lets you talk and then get back.
about that's bigger than a bread box, you know, it's more
Critical thinking.
us them getting additional federal dollars, right? It's what can be done with it, which is why I see Stuart
Ready for the ring. What?
and has been involved in it.
Coming up.
No, we're in.
Oh, good.
Is he a JLab?
Yes, he's the executive director of JLab.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's your office? Do you have an
Oh, yeah, we have an office, we're downtown Norfolk. Yeah, we work with all 17
Okay.
jurisdictions.
Well, hi, everyone. My goal was to kind of eat quickly so that by the time everyone's here and we're waiting for John to sit, which he just did. All right, John, we're all ready now. So, John, Martin, thank you for the opportunity to kind of present findings. I think we've discussed a lot of great stuff. I'm going to touch on the key points in terms of what I have learned from a lot of these in-person and some video interviews I've conducted with some of the emerging hubs, some of the established hubs that exist in different parts of the world. For those of you who were able to attend the Internet Ecosystem Innovation Committee event in November, you probably met with some of the members who I've interviewed during this exercise. And again, my goal here, through our firm has been to do a more qualitative analysis on these hubs and really complement what John and Alan have put together. So as John Martin said earlier, both the expanded report and the summary report have been sent to all of you. And there are obviously, various different degrees of intentionality where different groups have kind of come together and taken some specific concrete steps that have led to economic growth, that have led to the development of digital infrastructure in these regions that I'm going to be talking about. So feel free to ask questions along the way, and I'll just touch on the key high points. John, does that sound good?
Use the clicker. Let's go.
All right. So I mentioned earlier about established and emerging hubs, right? So one of the other things that we did, John and myself, John from Telegeography, was that we wanted to deliberately have some sort of overlap around these hubs that we are evaluating. So Marseille, Hong Kong, Barcelona, Lisbon, Mumbai. Those are the 5 that John has talked about, and of course I'm going to give a more qualitative view. But the other ones listed, again, Lisbon is an interesting one we were talking about earlier in John's part of the presentation. But effectively, these 10, and this is not a finite list of interconnection hubs globally by any means, especially when you look at what's happening from an emerging perspective in the industry. So, but there are some overlaps in terms of, the list that Telegeography has. So what are we trying to uncover? Our goal, primary objective, was to find collaboration. Again, different areas of collaboration, degrees of collaboration coming across digital infrastructure industry. I deliberately am emphasizing on digital infrastructure because that comprises of data centers, subsea cables, terrestrial fiber, internet exchanges, of course, participation from local jurisdictions, and in some cases, real estate developers as well, as they've been involved in that evolution of digital infrastructure and how that collaboration has facilitated faster growth, how that collaboration has facilitated improved growth than what would have happened had that collaboration not happened. Sounds good? The ones in blue are emerging ones. The one in green are established ones, so to speak. We'll talk about, from a summary standpoint, right? Marseille. John has already talked about Marseille, and for those of you familiar with the industry, and I think, gosh, I was going to say last year, but that's almost 2 years back now, John Martin, right? When we had the
Marseille guys,
the Marseille guys, as they're known in our sector, presented. It's a classic case of public and private sector collaboration, and Marseille has evolved and grown very rapidly as an interconnection hub. Hong Kong is continuing its growth. Just last week, a new subsea cable landing there in Mega Eye, which is a data center, carrier-neutral data center campus in Hong Kong, which is very, very subsea friendly, where 10 out of 12 subsea cables are landing there. Stockholm, a bit different from the perspective of more emphasis on terrestrial fiber, dense domestic fiber growth. And in the emerging hubs, there's a varying degree of, you look at Barcelona, there's at the moment 0 subsea cables in Barcelona. By the next year, there'll be 3. But the growth that's happening there in terms of, world's largest data center company, Digital Realty, entering into that market, collaborating with the local CLS, collaborating with the terrestrial fiber providers is quite interesting. The Denmark area, again, a very interesting case study from the perspective of real estate provider, getting into the data center business on the heels of a subsea cable on which they bought capacity, brought in a major hyperscaler as a subsea customer and as a data center customer in the Denmark region. Lisbon Signs we briefly talked about earlier. Crete is another interesting one where a deliberate effort has been put in place by data center provider to enter Crete really with the goal of replicating the success of Marseille, building a carrier-neutral data center plan with the subsea cables that land there. Mumbai, more collaboration needed, I would say, in between the government, the private sector is starting to happen now. A lot of traditional telco-driven regulated cable landing stations and subsea cables. Fortaleza, which is in South America, Brazil, and by the way, the BRUSA cable that lands here in our region has a termination point or a branching unit in Fortaleza as well. There is a deliberate effort to build a NAP or a network access point there by different players involved. And Guam is relatively new in terms of the development happening there, where one of the interesting findings was that a private company, RTI Cables, partnered with the local government to pass a bill into law called the Guam Undersea Access for Homes Act, where Guam being a small island, but really they wanted to have the landing fees and the process up to speed with the global internet infrastructure, global industry standard, so more subsea cables can land there. Thoughts, comments? I'm going to hit on the key points. To me, the right-hand side of the slide is really most important. It's a telling story. A question was asked by, I don't see him anymore, Pat Cody. He's gone, right? Okay. He's over there. Oh, he's there. Pat Cody asked a question earlier about importance of subsea cable landing diversity. So from a landing perspective, there's an element where there's a beach manhole diversity, which is happening in our region now between Camp Pendleton and Sandbridge as physical location. Then there is and the other element of diversity is you have the backhaul, which is taking that subsea from the beach manhole to the landing station. And what you see here in Marseille, both on the left and right hand side, the left side is the beach manhole location. The right hand side is where the SLTE or the submarine line transmission equipment is located. All of those locations are diversified. Now, from a data center perspective, Interaction, which is now owned by Digital Realty, has grown their data center quite significantly. Most noticeable one was they converted a World War II submarine landing base into a data center for hyperscalers as well. But what you see here on this slide is intentionality where Port of Marseille invested in some of those infrastructure, some of the beach manholes, diversifying that is still considered part of Marseille. And that's been one of the reasons that within a short span of 5 to 10 years, it's become one of the top internet connection hubs globally. And also there are additional 6 to 7 cables expected to land there in the next 3 to 4 years. So a great case study from that perspective. Hong Kong, the biggest driver here that I learned in terms of those interviews, one is if you look at the map on the right-hand side, it has a strategic advantage in terms of its location being the gateway to Southeast Asia. But there is a very, very intentional effort by a company, a privately owned company called Sunny Vision, that's focused on growing their data center business with landing more subsea cables. So 10 out of those 12 cables land in Sunny Vision's data center campus. But not just that, their CEO who was here with us in November shared with us that they realized that they were running out of land for having a neutral cable landing station. So a bunch of real estate developers got together, bought additional land to build that neutral landing station, which has led to further growth of subsea cables in Hong Kong, which in turn is leading to more data center business as well. Stockholm, a bit different proposition I mentioned earlier. It's more localized terrestrial fiber. The Stockholm Internet Exchange is one of the region's largest hubs for an internet exchange standpoint for distribution of traffic within region. So more focus on regional traffic exchange versus international in this case. But I think, John, this is in one of your on your global internet hubs with the amount of internet traffic passing through to Stockholm from that perspective, right? Yeah. Barcelona. So this is where, I mentioned earlier that those first three subsea cables are scheduled to land and be ready for service between this year and next year. And there is a strong potential for more content to be deployed there. But you see these companies on the right-hand side where they have collaborated, they have come together. For me, the best example here was Barcelona Cable Landing Station, which is pure play, a cable landing station owned, operated by Afrix Telecom. They collaborated. They actually went to Digital Realty. They've been talking for them for the last 5 years, and they proposed a plot of land right next to the CLS. Why? To build a carrier-neutral data center. And Digital Realty is developing that now, which will lead to further growth of subsea cables to landing in the cable landing station, having the ability to grow into the carrier-neutral data center in Barcelona. The region of Denmark, so in addition to what's happening there from the perspective of bulk infrastructure, which is the real estate, the company with the real estate background that formed data center business on the heels of subsea cable landing, you have hyperscalers that have gone there as well in the general region. And what's happening is more, leveraging the free cooling, the green energy. There is more compute that's happening there from an infrastructure perspective, from a data center business standpoint. And that's also, and DKIX, I think it was last year, the DKIX exchange was announced in Esbjerg as well. And the reason we have mentioned Esbjerg, Endrup, and Blåberg, because they are kind of interconnected in terms of the development, overall development that's happening there. And I think that's where stand from a Dominion standpoint, highlighting the renewables. There's a huge emphasis there in that region, as you know, on green energy, and that's where where we can follow that as well. John, if I may, is there where you're saying that project, and which is fine, the Olispio is more, is that what you're referring to earlier?
Phoenix Data Center.
Pardon me?
I was just saying, we don't know what will ultimately come with the Phoenix Data Center project.
Oh, you mean the Start Campus?
Yeah, the Start Campus project.
Yeah, that's 495 megawatts. That's a very ambitious project. Yeah. That's what's been announced, and I think, no, you're absolutely right. But the Olispio cable is moving forward. Okay, got it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify. Yeah, but the data center campus, if you see, with Start Campus, that's a 495 project. It is very ambitious. You're absolutely right. But the key there is that sort of those areas, and if you notice, the existing subsea cables are landing in 3 different cable landing stations, 16 cables between Cinis and Lisbon market. So a market to watch, I would say, at this point. Fortaleza, so Angola Cables, I think, have made a very deliberate effort to build a NAP as a network access point, where they have a neutral internet exchange called PIX. There are active discussions for that market with DKIX as we speak, to kind of bring it to more global standards. But there's a combination there of hyperscale players that are partnering with the subsea cables that are existing there, and new subsea cables coming as well. And Telxius, that's sort of landing party, has obviously in Virginia Beach as well, in Camp Pendleton. Telxius is the primary landing party for Maria and Brusa cable. So they are one of the key players in Fortaleza, and they are working on having additional subsea cables in that market as well. Now, this is a visual representation of what exists or is under development in Crete. Now, if you notice, there are 11 subsea cables sort of spread across the island, but not a single cable landing station. So again, there are local terrestrial fiber companies like Grid Telecom, Landcom, who are investing further in terrestrial fiber and subsea cable landing stations. But Lambda Helix, which has been since acquired by Digital Realty as well, has entered into Crete to build that carrier-neutral data center facility to have more traffic sort of becoming a hub in that market as a hub, as a complement to Athens. And that's what Digital Realty's strategy is, again, to replicate the success of Marseille and have that this market as a redistribution point for content for Greece, Turkey, Northern Africa, and Central Eastern Europe as well. Mumbai, I would say there's more work to be done. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of development happening in India as we speak. The concept of open access is picking up. Traditionally, the cable landing stations have been owned, operated by the incumbent carriers. That's changing as we speak. And recently, what I learned was there was a survey done by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, TRAI, along with Department of Telecommunications, where the government has actively reached out to the private sector to get their input on what are the kind of things that the private sector is looking for in terms of policy making, compliance, making landing of cables easy in India. So, which is quite promising to see it's happening for the first time there. Guam, I mentioned in my summary remarks about RTI Cables, again, a private company working with the local government in passing a bill which became a law last year. What that does is really it standardizes the lease terms. It has a specific price point set for landing of the subsea cables, and that's sort of leading to more growth in that market. And it's kind of positioned more as a gaming hub. And of course, the strategic location of Guam, which is within 100 milliseconds to Korea, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and down south to Australia as well in a similar way. This is sort of a summary slide to kind of show the amount of collaboration that has existed in these markets. Of course, in markets like Marseille, Hong Kong, Barcelona, there is a much stronger sense there where multiple parties have come together, they've joined hands, and they've seen the benefit of that when it comes to growing that infrastructure and leading to more economic growth in the region as well. As a complement to the primary report, I've added a slide which shows within US, the 10 interconnection hubs as they exist today. If there's one thing I can mention about these hubs, they're not known by who owns them or who operates them, they're known by their physical address. Why? Because the amount of traffic that's peering, as we talked about earlier, or exchanging from one network to the other is extremely significant here. And I think, John, this is also part of some of the reports that Telegeography has put together in the past. And specifically, I took a look at Miami as the Napa of the Americas, right, in Florida, which has been sort of a purpose-built interconnection point. There's IP transit purchasing that happens there. And recently, so the facility was started as a telco facility. It was taken over by Terramark, which got acquired by Equinix. So the owner of that facility is Equinix, the data center company. But really, it has evolved as the top 10 most interconnected buildings in the world. And it's also considered as the gateway of US to Latin American region as well. So what did we uncover as part of this exercise, right? So I think 6 markets demonstrated strong instances of collaboration that happened in a very deliberate way. And when that happens, right, that leads to faster development of infrastructure, economic growth, and the degree of intentionality has obviously varied in these 6 markets. And the other 4, I feel that there is potential to benefit even more as they collaborate further and have more digital infrastructure growth happen there. That's a graphical representation of the markets, and I think that's it. Happy to take questions, thoughts, comments.
So Vinay, in a nutshell, when you think about the collaboration, some markets are more collaborative than others, right? Some markets you see the government working with private sector.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Government has been very, very hands-on working with the private sector in some markets. And in some markets, there's been a very deliberate effort from different sectors of the digital infrastructure industry that have come together and recognized that, if they keep doing what they're doing on their own, probably going to take them 10 years to get someplace. If they join hands and do it together, they can get there in 2 years.
The way which you've taught me over time is that the data centers are all united in sort of an industry with publications, right? And terrestrial networks, but there's very little integration into this totality picture and looking at a whole ecosystem. And that's the leading edge work that's happening.
I think that's the leading edge work. I mean, for our region for sure. And I think and I mentioned this, from the very beginning, having that holistic view. One is the physical region, right? You look at Virginia Beach, you look at, the entire I-64 corridor, you look at Richmond, but then also you look at what are the pieces that are there. The sum of all those pieces is a lot more today, and also from a future development perspective, how that's positioned externally than the individual parts.
The cooperation between data centers and networks is getting a lot better. It's
getting
better. A lot better, but it's only really in certain segments. The really forward-thinking data centers, for sure. There are a lot of others playing catch up.
It is a stupid question, but is Ashburn part of this, or is that a separate thing and an effective competitor to what we're trying to do?
I would say it's separate when it comes to our analysis, our work, our study, right? Because the reality is Ashburn, before Virginia Beach happened, before the subsea cables landed, the traffic. I mean, obviously it's known Ashburn is a leading data center market globally, right? That traffic internationally, one would ask what was happening before 2017. It was going either through New York, New Jersey, or down south through Florida. In terms of international traffic, there was no other way, really. So what's happened now is that one is the international traffic passing through our region, which is, I think, over the last 5 years, like somewhere around 18%, going from 0 to 18%. But in parallel, in areas like White Oak Tech Park, in other parts, there's been more localized development when it comes to data centers, when it comes to terrestrial fiber networks like Metro Fiber Networks and others. So Ashburn is Ashburn, and Ashburn is also, I would say, if you look at it from a Northern Virginia perspective, you look at Loudoun County, you look at Prince William, you look at Fairfax, right? It's more as a data center hub. And what our region is, this mega region is evolving to become, is a combination of data centers, subsea cables, where, by the way, the traffic from Ashburn is coming through a good portion of that now through Virginia Beach, right? But that's not the only way for traffic to flow. If traffic from Virginia Beach has to go to Atlanta, there's no reason for it to go to Ashburn first and then go to Atlanta. And that's where the NAP, or a network access point, in Sandston in Virginia comes into play, right? So I would say that as part of this study, I would look at Ashburn more from a data center perspective. I think our region here is more along the lines of Virginia Beach, Williamsburg, the I-64 corridor, and Richmond.
Will Ashburn look at this as advancing their interests, or as a threat to their interests?
Well, advancing their business when it comes to connectivity, obviously it is. When it comes to alternative to Ashburn from a data center perspective, I think we're already seeing that happen.
Yeah.
Stan, would you agree? Like in terms of even the requests that?
Yeah, the way to think about Ashburn, it's so big, it dwarfs every other market in the world. Next 6 markets in the U.S., some of them together, they're not as big as Ashburn. So what I would describe what we're trying to build is a complementary market. It's not going to be a competition. It's the way Vinay described it, I agree. It's never going to be as big in data centers as that. Nobody's going to catch that area. It's too big. But you can build a very robust data center market here, the way Vinay described data centers, interconnectivity, the fiber network. So it'll be a complement.
Yep.
I guess what I'm trying to think of is, just from the Commonwealth perspective, is collaboration is the key to accelerate things.
Yeah.
That's the list of people who need to collaborate, what does the state do?
Right.
To help facilitate that.
That's right.
And that's not clear to me. You didn't get into that. So what's the recipe of?
That we think we should go to Northern Virginia and talk to them about our plan and what we have in mind to be complementary. because they're seeing the pushback and data centers moving south. But how can they understand what we're trying to be? We are, when it comes down to the international perspective, the very fastest, lowest latency to Europe and South America. That's our position. And that complements what Northern Virginia needs. And so that's what we would pitch them on. How do we develop our infrastructure for even more cables? Anthony, do I have this right?
Well said. We are, Mr. Secretary, we are not trying to be Ashburn's little brother.
That's right.
I think Stan said it well, Vinay said it well. Ashburn is what it is. Our niche is going to be having the data center complement that's growing in the region and the international connectivity.
I do think that we recognize what the CMB did, especially these sales and use tax exemption rates, some of those things, they've laid the foundation for success. And if you go back and look in the Wakefield Cushman report, they also rank tax markets in the world as taxes. And I think Virginia's the lowest.
Right.
And so I think the state's done a great job with that extension.
That's right.
That's why I'm here. What else
Right.
can we do? Awesome idea. What else can we do to
That's right.
make this happen?
But I've got some ideas, and I echo your comment about. May not. The way things are going in Washington, it seems like maybe we're just handing it out. But Virginia Beach, at least Hampton Roads, I think I can speak for the rest of my colleagues, aren't trying to replicate an Ashburn simply because the real estate isn't available. We're looking for that value-added opportunity, next phase, if you will. The other side of that is, and it's still a mystery to me, I mean, Ashburn just didn't pop up for any particular reason other than maybe the federal government wanted that in Washington, D.C. That's one hypothesis. The other is, you talk about collaboration. We have our universities and colleges at the table. How do we get the federal government at the table to talk about aiding and abetting what we're trying to get done? Because they're out there, they're in Hampton Roads. They might not want to talk to us or even let us know what systems they have in place, but how do we get them to the table? How can Virginia bring that conversation to the table to help develop what we're talking about? I don't think that costs anything other than a cab ride to DC or something.
But we've not engaged with our congressman.
They know we're doing this plan at some level, but I think that's our next step. That once we get this plan published, written up, and we're going to go through the 10 recommendations next, that we then think about the cadence of briefing the delegation, as well as going to Northern Virginia and briefing the leadership there. So we really have talked about this the whole time as being collaborative and complementary.
Is there any marketing element baked into this at all?
Yes.
In some conversation?
Let's go into this, because that's the last two ideas. And one, really, the last idea comes right out of everything we heard Vinay say. There was no forum that we have stepped into the vacuum and created kind of the precursor to an industry association where we can all get together and talk about these things and really try to advance the ecosystem faster. So that's our 10th recommendation, to really turn this group into something that can be lasting and that can have a longer term impact and can go with a voice to Northern Virginia, can go with a voice to the universities. So thank you, Vinay, and thank you, John. And y'all's full reports are amazing, and everybody has copies of those.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
So Guam, if I let it right, 170,000 people in Guam. They've got a ridiculous amount of subsea cables. Is that because they set up the structure with the law to set a price point, a process procedure?
The price point today was way too low. So the government was actually not making enough money. So the private sector stepped in and actually increased their price point to make it more meaningful for the government. But it also has been more of a pass-through traditionally, as you would imagine, right? Yeah.
They've made a whole, they've got a dozen subsea cables.
Yeah.
And they've just made a structure nobody's gonna stop at Guam because there's 170,000 people. There has to
No,
be
it's
an economic
because
region.
it's a regeneration.
Region, yeah, there's a region,
It's a
yeah,
region, you know,
yeah,
so-
yeah.
There's even infrastructure in that area that said, here's your price point, I don't think there's anything like that now. I think it's a one-off negotiation.
Yeah.
Yep. And I don't know, that would be the first meeting, but maybe down the road. All right.
John,
Ray.
one thing I wanted to touch base on is again, you've done an excellent job and everyone's done an excellent job in laying out, what's going on around the world, the opportunities for us and so forth. But I haven't heard too much discussed about the end users. Once we get all this infrastructure in place and all, how can we attract major corporations because we've got this unique asset in our area? Was anything touched upon in this study?
That's one of our recommendations, is to package this plan and work in tandem with our economic development leaders. We just had Jason at our board meeting last week who said, I'm all over what you guys are doing. This is awesome. But to be able to say, here's our integration plan. Here's what we're doing as a group, as an industry united from Henrico County to Virginia Beach, because this is what we want to do. And in fact, if there are going to be 10 to 12 new deep sea cables that are going to be put somewhere, why aren't we going after those in concert with each other? Why aren't we having the pitch that we can say, here's how this will work? So that's one of the recommendations too. Let me get into this, because I think this is a handout that you have. Excuse me, John. This is the document that y'all got in advance. This has the 10 recommendations. And I would hope none of them are a surprise, because they've been coming out of all of our conversations the last 6 or 7 months, and predominantly from the work that you guys have been doing. So I just want to take us through this, because this is what Dr. Holsworth's going to help. We're going to package this up into that great handout that I talked about earlier, but as well as into a document that we got to send back to Go Virginia, but also use as our strategic marketing plan to really get the industry excited, as well as use it in pitches to the appropriate people. And of course, Virginia Beach is going to take the lead, and the subsea cable, it's their property. I mean, we're going to have to work with everybody to make sure everybody's aligned. But these are the 10 broad strategies that come out of the characteristics that define robust global internet hubs. And so we organized our recommendations around these 10. And at the very start of this, in our first meeting in Williamsburg, we talked about what should our goals be, and equity was a primary goal. And equity has 2 components. One is ubiquitous access to broadband, and the second one is access to higher paying jobs. So what we've learned through this process is that becoming this robust internet interconnection point, that actually creates the opportunity for even a thicker, more robust network and ISPs coming in to be able to handle that last mile. And that's when you get to everybody having access to broadband. And the higher paying jobs, we tried to show you with that Jobs EQ data, that if you grow your digital infrastructure, you're going to create these kind of jobs. So the second 2 goals were to serve all communities in the corridor. And one of the things Stan said to us early on is it's like Groundhog Day, every day going to a locality and trying to explain the advantages of many of the things that we've gone over, and it has to start at the beginning. And then how do you generate local jobs for this community, that it's not just a pass through? So those were our 3 goals. Stan?
I was going to say, one of the questions you asked was what can the state do? The state passed, I believe it was last year, broadband.
Yep.
Bill for rural communities. Yep. And so I know a lot of that, corridor we're talking about, that legislation was for the very rural communities to do the last mile. So it's just another selling.
That's right. That's right. So getting into our recommendations, and again, you have these in front of you, and we went and followed these sort of 10 characteristics that came out of all the research. The first one is to support this local internet networks and the routes to other markets. And thinking about where we are today, we have a pretty good network. We've dedicated a whole meeting to understanding what the network system looks like in our 2 markets combined. But how do we continue investment in that area? And I think from the standpoint of trying to get more people together to understand what we have, is our first recommendation is really inventory what the terrestrial network is that's in place, and really be able to publish that on an annual basis so people can see where we are and where we need to grow. A second component that gets back to why we need to have this ongoing dialogue as an industry is that there's discussion starting about the value of satellites and how does that work with the existing terrestrial network. So where does that conversation take place, and watching that technology evolve and being able to point to that and share that and have a common understanding of that. So these are the first two recommendations just on that terrestrial network idea. How do we support a growing terrestrial network and a robust terrestrial network? So that's number one. And I'm going to keep this pace going so we can get through this, but please raise your hand if there's something here that's you want to comment on. The second one is to explore this potential of the corridor ring from Hampton Roads to Richmond. So right now, and I spent a little time on the Hampton Roads fiber network ring that's eventually going to connect the 17 localities in Hampton Roads. And that's a municipal ring that has been, the startup money came from the cities, but now with GTS, they're going to start to see the benefit of that and the payback on that into the broadband authority. And so potentially down the road, do we want to think about how do we link Hampton Roads in the Richmond community in a more elongated network that runs the entire corridor? And there has been a great example that got put in place called the Q Loop in Frederick, Maryland, that runs 40 miles down to Ashburn. Loops goes underneath the Potomac River in two places, but it allows the guys in Frederick on this piece of property to really be like they're right in the center of Ashburn. So when I think about this, the future state here, is there a way to connect the Hampton Roads ring with all the work that Pat Cody has done on the Eastern Shore with their network and linking all the way up to Wallops Island? And right now, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel actually has conduit in place that we can run through and for that link. So just think about the future where we have a hyperloop that goes all the way up and down the corridor. So that's number two. And there's a lot of detail behind this where we talk about what's happening in Hampton Roads. And then this idea of exploring this potential in the Richmond region and thinking about it in terms of this loop that connects the state capitol with all the higher educational institutions, 44 of them, as well as Jeff Lab, NASA Langley, all the way up to Wallops, and what that story would be for us and sharing it with economic development opportunities.
And I'll just share, I think that's a tremendous goal to reach for. The more you can create a stronger backbone for those communities that might be underserved throughout the corridor region, and attract that development, attract those networks via better backhaul, better backbone into Richmond, then that starts the process of really building up that local ecosystem in Richmond that then attracts the attention of bigger operators. In addition to primary goal of reaching unreached communities.
Right. So it helps on two levels.
Right. And actually, I'll give you a third level.
Right.
It also is going to facilitate bringing DKICs into Hampton Roads.
Yeah. We called, when we got RVA 757 connects together, we called ourselves the I-64 Innovation Corridor because we feel like innovation's the future. This would be the defining crown to really have the entire corridor loop together. And I really encourage everybody here to go look at Frederick, Maryland, and to look at the Q Loop. Just Google that and see what these guys have done. It's amazing.
And
the quantum loop.
And the other thing is it's actually done on the heels of Quantum Loophole, which is a digital infrastructure company. They're not a data center company. They're not a data center operator. They're not a data center builder. They're infrastructure player. They've disrupted. I was talking to Josh Snow on 2 days back, their CEO. They've disrupted the data center model in a positive way by developing, first of all, going to Frederick, Maryland. No one would have thought of that. And secondly, developing the underlying infrastructure from power, fiber, which we're talking about, the Q Loop, water, sewage, the entire infrastructure needed so that multiple data center companies can come build and operate data centers. So as an example, they've already announced publicly Aligned Data Center. They've got other clients coming as well.
Yep.
He's building a plug and play data.
Plug and play,
site.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So think about it, think about one of our mega sites doing that, right? So a lot of detail here. The third one is encourage the growing number of local data centers. And so this, again, gets to the idea of partnering with Northern Virginia as the International Data Center alley, technically, kind of informally what it's called around the world, but really to go and coordinate with the leaders in Northern Virginia, to really talk to them about what we're trying to do here on a global scale and really reinforce our positioning as being the fastest, lowest latency connection to Europe and South America, and something that they need, that they will benefit from as we develop our robust infrastructure here. And a lot of detail behind this, but it's basically packaging this and taking it to them. The other thing is thinking about the work that the Alliance is doing right now, inventorying the 10 best data center sites in Hampton Roads, and to think about a parallel effort here, as well as some of these mega sites that we have across the state, where you guys are talking about a budget, more money going to the mega sites. Is there a way, when we think about what we're hearing with Amazon and their $32 billion, how can we be more intentional about packaging this entire ecosystem as part of that solution, to see if we can get some of those sites in Richmond and Hampton Roads as part of their locations?
John, can I add on to that?
Yes.
And you may have heard of the initiative known as Future-Based Design associated with Oceana Naval Air Station.
That's right.
They are working closely with the City of Virginia Beach and others that will work with them to put into the stream of commerce almost 1,000 acres of property. One of the complementary industries that they pointed out, we've all been talking about, is data center development on that property. So
that's right.
Neighbor to a major master jet base for the U.S. military.
1,000 acres.
1,000 acres.
That's right.
Now, it's not all contiguous.
No, but that's part of what we need to do, is package these stories, right, for the investors, as well as the sales tax. It's been extended to 2035. We got to eliminate that, because there's already discussion in the industry about, well, that's been kicked back once. It's out there as a barrier. Let's eliminate that barrier and send a message to the world that we're in business here. This is our ecosystem. Number 4, and Stan, this is really your market area, but the reliable and inexpensive power and local transmission permitting. And I think Stan's done a good job of explaining that it's not really Dominion's issue, it's that local last mile of the transmission line. But how can we educate all of the other jurisdictions that are in our mega region about everything that we've learned, but also about this transmission? How do we get them ready so we can say yes when there's an opportunity?
Yeah, I think the real trick there, if you think about site selection, is along corridor, very large areas, large properties, or multiple properties that you combine.
Yep.
And the market that it has
Right.
to be near transmission, hopefully very near fiber. And that's the secret message.
Right.
And have local support for it.
Right.
Those are the 3 things that you can put back
In advance.
in advance.
In advance is what you taught us. And so the key thing here is that you guys, most states, most utilities is like 6% of the energy is going to data centers. You guys have 20% of your energy. You guys have enough energy that you have today and in the future to satisfy what we're dreaming of. We just got to get the localities on board in our area. And so that's all the narrative here, that again is the handout that you have there. Number 5, and this is something I've really have come to love and been taught by these guys that really know this industry, to get an IX and some IXPs. And IX is the Internet Exchange, and IXPs are the location that it happens. Hampton Roads doesn't have one now, and Richmond does, and we've talked about this and what it's going to take. And this is going to get us on the map, because as John said, this is the public data that people are mining. And once they see how many eyeballs are connected, they're going to go, we need to invest more here. This is the flag to the international industry. We're hot. Come here, right? Okay. So a lot of detail backing this up, a significant opportunity as a group for us to get the university presidents together, explain what we're talking about, get all those eyeballs connected. There's this low-hanging fruit for us. Number 6, attract additional international subsea cables. So Alan, what's his last name? Malden.
Yep.
He is the international guru when telegeography helps people and helps them strategically like this. He's the guy that the subsea cable investors, and I asked him how many people are making decisions about where subsea cables go in the world. He said probably 35. They're not that many, but we got to really get on their radar about what's available. And this is where I think we can be really bold. I started this morning by telling you how far behind we are, because people don't like to hear it, but we got to be transformational with this plan. We got to be bold. And so when I think about, okay, they're going to be 10 to 12 new cables. A lot of those guys, the cables in New York and Miami are 25 years old. They're legacy, they're slow. The industry needs more cables with data growing exponentially. So where are they going to put these? And Alan said, yeah, you probably have a good shot at 2 or 3, but why do we have to just think about that? So there's a lot that we can do here. The idea, when we think about and what Alan has said to us, there are 4 landing spots in Camp Pendleton. The 3 of them are live cables to Europe and South America. The 4th one, telegeography is saying, not quite sure if it's going to make it to South Africa. Not quite sure, because South Africa has got another link they're probably going to do first. And so I wouldn't count that 4th one as a final. So that leaves 1 extra capacity in Camp Pendleton. But we also have now the Sandbridge location, and that's 4 cables, right? And 2 of which, we're told, are accounted for. That's what Greg has said. 2 of them are already accounted for. So that means we have 2 in Sandbridge and then 1 in Camp Pendleton. That's 3 cables kind of on the market, sites. And they're going to be 10 to 12 new ones. So how do we really make ourselves look as good as possible? Patrick Cody from the Eastern Shore is saying, there maybe is an alternative landing site coming in right to the tip of the Eastern Shore. They then could go through the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, which Vinay is telling me that's a strategy that other people are doing in other markets, something that creative. So how do we package all of this up and go to those 35 people as a united force saying, this is what we're trying to do with this broader plan, this bigger vision. We need you to be part of this thing. This is a good picture that's in your plan that shows Camp Pendleton on the upper part of it, and then Sandbridge at the lower right, going into that cable landing station. How can we be even more diversified? How do we package this story in a really powerful way and go to those investors? That's the question. Related to that is the second thing that we learned in, maybe our first meeting. It's hard to believe, but these cables get severed and damaged by anchors all over the world. There are all these stories in market after market. I just can't believe it, because I own a boat, I fish, I drop my anchor everywhere, never feel like I hit anything. And maybe I'm hitting them, but the Virginia Maritime Industry Association with the U.S. Coast Guard is in the process of plotting out where we can have zones, protected zones of no anchorage. And so Dominion is working really closely now on where the wind farm's going to be, and then where these shipping routes are going to be. And so when this plan gets finalized by the Coast Guard and the Virginia Maritime Industry, Secretary Cummings, maybe that gets endorsed by the General Assembly. They said, we got to approve this and show this with the other things in this whole plan to the industry and investors. That's what we're trying to do. Any questions on any of that? All right, but number 7 is provide a growing tech-savvy workforce. So currently, we have a number of institutions that are involved in technical certifications, badges, degrees, and tech-related jobs. And there's several initiatives that are going on right now. And Nancy, you want to talk just for a second about Techonomy and
Yeah, well, a couple things are going on. Several months ago, Ream Van Hampton Roads and ODU commissioned a piece of work from Techonomy, which does a lot of work all over the country around economic development, how regions can grow. And anyway, this one particularly is aimed at what we call the data science cluster. So they've actually inventoried in today's world, let alone the future world, some of the demands for jobs, how they can be created. And a number of our universities are actually working together as we speak to articulate how they can come together and put together a strategy on the training side and talent side for four-year universities, and then of course including the community college and the pathway with K through 12. So a lot's going on, and I think what's exciting about it is now they can more directly align it as opposed to working independently, which I think has been happening. So we probably should even add them in at some point.
Yeah, when that study is ready to be public. But this is also where like Catherine Rao from William and Mary and why Morris was really one of the funders of the matching dollars from ODU and others. Everybody wants to work together closer on this. And I know my friends at William and Mary, Anthony, that thinking about cyber, this is a huge opportunity to coordinate. Right now, the Greater Washington Partnership, which is a group very much like RVA 757 Connects, but it's Baltimore, Washington, Richmond. They, through VCU, put a certification together for tech workers. And so we've talked to them, and they said, sure, we could extend that into your territory easily. But the desired future is to really have a seamless coordination of all job training and development in this digital infrastructure related jobs. And what just happened at SMU is they put together the first ever in the country a master's program in data center science. And so we should be thinking about that with the robustness of what we're trying to build. We got to make sure our educational institutions are aligned completely with that. So the immediate talent pipeline is to use some of the things I just talked about, like the VCU certification. But midterm is really to put that plan together and really think about the entire tech pipeline. In long term, maybe even think about tying in some of the curriculum, even have majors in this idea of the digital infrastructure from a larger perspective, not just data sciences.
One thing Jim, they don't have a problem attracting top candidates.
Right.
But they're having a real problem with folks that are going to vocational schools or two type schools.
Right.
So I wouldn't discount developing.
Oh, yeah.
You need
The whole pipeline.
The whole pipeline.
Right. On the next, so we're going to focus on Code RVA in the next, Code VA Innovation Pipeline, and really all the way down to the K through 12 program. So that's a whole, I think, from all of these things, that's a longer term perspective, but something that we should be invested in and really figure out. Number 8 is increase the awareness, familiarity, and support among local stakeholders for this growing digital infrastructure. And we spent several times talking about this topic, that it requires elected officials and government leaders to really understand what we have been talking about here, to really understand, like when we say Richmond should look into a potential ring, the Richmond region, that everybody understands and would welcome that investigation. And it may be that Richmond didn't need one, but the fact is, it's part of this larger infrastructure. And so we've got to have everybody understanding that this is part of our transformative push for our economies collectively and individually. And so this is an area where we've got to get our local folks really aware and familiar with all this. So what we're calling for is 2 things marketing wise: local stakeholder education, but potentially even a certification program for localities that they really, when I was a young man driving on 64, I'd see signs, Louisa County, a certified economic development community. Well, how can we think about certifying people as being global internet hub ready, or some better line than that? But how do we really take this? And Stan, you inspired this idea early on. You said you have to get in front of people and start over every time, back to the beginning. So how do we incorporate an active marketing of what we're trying to do to make this happen? And number 9 is kind of similarly, think about this on the international awareness scale. We now have, I heard a text from you that said that we're mentioned on the stage at an international conference. And so how do we build on this and really take our plan? I'm thinking that the actual map that we create as our executive summary, we can do as an insert in some publications, but work with the State Economic Development Partnership and in Henrico County and Virginia Beach and other local economic development agencies to figure out how do we really package all of this in a way that we can get on certainly the global internet infrastructure investors' radar. That's really what we're talking about doing. And we're glad to meet our new friends at TeleGeographic. So. And then the last point on this plan is really where I started, is we've got to build momentum for all of this through an organized and united industry. And so this idea is we've gotten a lot of traction with this group. We're going to have a real first-class plan that's going to articulate these strategies and the why, and talked about how this is going to help our economies and what's in it for me from a lot of different perspectives. But how do we keep this momentum going? And so the idea here is to maybe create something that is a steering committee. It becomes the global internet hub industry council, and that we continue to meet like this after our plan's finished, but really have ownership in it. How do we go as a group to Northern Virginia? How do we go as a group to the university leadership? How do we think about each one of these recommendations and what's it going to take to keep them going forward? So when you think about all this, we got to have some sort of prioritization. So in the plan, we try to look at each one of those recommendations and assign whether it should be first priority out of the gate or a second priority over the midterm, next 2 years, or it's of a longer term issue. And then those potential partners, who's really going to help with each one of these? And a lot of it gets back to economic development and to workforce development and to our education system. But it's important, I think, that third column is an important message that this is going to take everybody working together to make our industry develop even faster than it will on its own. And then how do we, with a smaller work group, put some dollar numbers against these things so we really can figure out what to ask for and how to align some of those jobs that we talked about before to the build out of this infrastructure. So I know that was a lot to go through in a short amount of time, and that's why we printed out the handout, but this comes out of all of our discussions to date and the recommendations that we heard from John and Vinay. And so the next steps that we have in the plan is that during the month of March, we will write all this up in longhand and have an official report, but also do that executive summary map and then share that with this group and get everybody's comments and then have something that we can publish at the beginning of April and then really start sharing it with people and moving forward, making this happen. So I'll stop there and open it up for comments. Yes. Yeah. You bet.
Do you ever get tired?
No, this is the most exciting thing that we could actually do.
Do you sleep?
No, I don't sleep. But I do want to say this because I have been in economic development my entire career. And I used to, when I first started 30 years ago, I worked for Fairfax County in economic development, and they were calling themselves, I worked for a marketing company, and we did ads for them that ran in the Wall Street Journal, spread ads that said why the next Silicon Valley is located 15 minutes from Capitol Hill. And if you looked around Fairfax County 30 years ago, you would go, what are we thinking? How could we say this? But we said it and lived up to it. And so when I think about all the numbers that I know about this region, that I grew up in Richmond, and I live in Hampton Roads and in Richmond, and I see how far we are behind Charlotte, because I go to Charlotte and help them a little bit. I go to Orlando. I mean, I get to see and count the cranes in other markets and come home and go, this is the very best place to live. But damn it, our story isn't out there. And we got to get more people here. And so when we stumbled on this and talking to Anthony in Virginia Beach and realized this opportunity, I said, this is it. This is the single best thing we could do because it it empowers every other industry. So we got to do this. We got to go forward and get more and more people excited about it and be part of us. Do this for adults.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Starting on with the minority, I think we're fine.
It's still going, but it's
just remote. I'll introduce to the remote. All right, so any lasting comments? Is this anything that?
Pat, did you still have a question?
Yes, three real quick points. One, as part of the regional network, if you look at the Southside Authority network, another diverse leg to Henrico in the Richmond and around Richmond region, I think is definitely something that should be considered and be part of the overall plan. And as part of that, and your talk on universities and government, because of the amount of fiber going in, we have an opportunity here to do some unique things. And that includes, rather than dealing with things like the Internet One that the colleges are currently using, the regional colleges and universities have an opportunity to take a small amount of fiber and create private networks so that their quantum computing or supercomputing or the research projects, and particularly cybersecurity, can all be on a closed loop separate from the internet that can't be hacked directly unless they open up a bridge to the internet themselves. And that applies to the government installations as well. They can have private rings that don't run through the worldwide network and enable their work. That's my first comment. The second is it worthwhile looking, when we're looking at local economic development effects, looking at Chattanooga, who, because of regulatory permission and a forward-thinking utility, have got one of the fastest and best connected small city communities in the country, and are now teaming up to put quantum computing on that network, and what that'll mean and does mean for that region. And then my third one goes to Vinay. As part of developing the interconnection and data centers for Hampton Roads, so that some of that low latency stuff from subsea cables happens immediately when they hit the beach, should we be trying to attract digital energy?
Mm-hmm. Did he finish? This is a reason.
Digital reality, I'm sorry.
Ambitious.
Yes, I'm done.
Okay.
Look at it, everyone, look at it.
Well, I just want
Who should I look at?
over there.
I missed
Yes.
was there a question?
Yes, question.
No, I look at you. I missed it. I can't understand.
Should we be trying to attract digital realty in order to achieve some of the interchange and data center goals in the network?
Or should we be trying to attract,
Digital realty.
yeah, I think it's not just digital realty. I think it's as a result of this, there has to be a concerted effort industry-wide in terms of what our objectives are. Again, I think we have to tell the full story.
Right.
I think that's important versus, kind of look at it piece by piece. I think that's important. And why stop at digital realty? I mean, if our goal is to reach out to the data center industry to build a data center in Virginia Beach, then we got to reach out to the data center industry, digital realty, and all of the other.
Yeah.
I would take that.
And do it with this story.
Do it with the full story.
With the full story. This is what we're doing.
Full story, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, and I want to be clear here, so like with the ring, there needs to be a separate effort looking at, does it make sense here? And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But all of these things need to happen in a parallel fashion. Here's our plan, and we're all part of this.
Well, and thinking together with your partners in the community and find out what problems they need to solve specifically. So if there's a problem with getting good access in the Hampton Roads region, that ring solves that problem. That's right. One, but you may not need the same solution here. Right. If you don't have the same problem with redundant access for multiple backbone providers. Right. And so maybe the answer then is to interconnect that ring with more robust backhaul into this region, going specifically pop to specific data centers. So that you're attracting the peering from those locations directly into Richmond. Something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just come down and buy a beach house in Sandbridge and use that as your access. Live there, you know, it's pretty rough.
I'm gonna call
So is everybody,
I'm gonna call it Mr. Quad method.
yeah,
They're boring what? Chesapeake Bay Ridge Tunnel right now, they're boring the Hampton Road Tunnel. I'm gonna bet there's no form you can fill out to get access with fiber between those tunnels. There needs to be a form, there needs to be a price point, and all needs to be set ahead, so when it does complete, people can pull right through.
and there,
Guam's, 170,000 people in the Virginia's fire. I mean, that's crazy.
crazy.
I think that's where putting that infrastructure in terms of the conduit infrastructure is gonna be as close to future proofing it as we can get, because at the end of the day, you gotta have the ability to pull fiber, and that's where you put those conduits in. Yeah.
Recommending a recipe, a form structure, approval, this process, what the process is. I can't tell, I get RFPs requesting for people to put equipment in our facility, and it doesn't matter if I complete them. If the checklist says that the tax abatement for equipment is one of the criteria, if it doesn't exist in the locality, they don't go any further in the form. I'm getting requests that they're saying 90 days for RFP to go out, completed and signed, 90 more days equipment delivered. If that process is not even in there, if it's going to be checked off ahead of time, they're skipping the expectation.
That's right.
It seems to skip them all the time.
So,
One of the things, John, there's probably no reason why that particular option couldn't be explored now. As
Yes.
opposed to waiting for report, right?
absolutely.
That might be very helpful, actually, to have a little bit of information.
And I think, Bob, I think the PDC has actually got a grant in federally for this. Yeah. So guys, this is the next step. We're going to write this up. Everybody's going to get a draft copy of it. I'm saying we don't need to come back together in person as this Global Internet Hub Steering Committee, that we can do this electronically, that we'll post a draft and we'll get everybody's comments. But the next step is to really articulate all this in a great way and do that map. And then from there, what I want to suggest is that we think about turning this work, people that want to be involved moving forward, that we create this, for lack of a better term right now, this idea of a digital infrastructure council, and let that be housed at RVA Connects just for the beginning, but ultimately over time, we can spin it out and make it into some formal association. But to keep this plan going, basically. So I'm seeing nods. Everybody, you don't have to join, but that's what I'm thinking.
I think to keep the plan going, to
Yeah.
have a unified forum, a
Right.
unified voice for the region, I think that's very important, because all of this work where we have come so far, if we don't move forward with it, if you don't have a common platform, it's just going to go by the side.
Right.
And I know, John, you wouldn't like to see
Well, I wouldn't like
that.
to see that.
Yeah.
All right, any parting words? Thank you guys for 3 hours and for the last, 5-6 months staying involved. And thank you, Go Virginia, for helping to fund this. And yeah. And thank you, CarMax, for hosting us.
Before we depart, we want to go out to the center area here to get a picture of everybody.
Oh, that's a great
So
idea.
we'll follow, leave it out there and I'll take the picture. Those online, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it. If you have any questions, reach out to me.
Shamir.
Nice to see you, yeah. Fabulous. Nice place to work.